Well, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will get started. I apologise for the late start of the conference because of, actually, ironically, because of security. What we'll try and do, we only have the room till 12:30, so we'll try and deliver all the sessions on time, get us back on course, and that may mean cutting down some of the speaking time, but hopefully there'll be plenty of time for questions and answers. Let me first of all start by thanking all of you for being here and enduring our security, or getting through our security. Well done. I just wanted to, what I'll do is I'll say a few opening words to get the conference underway, and then we'll move straight on to the first panel. My name is Sai Kamal. I am the leader of the ECR group, the European Conservatives and Reformists group, which is the third largest group here in the European Parliament of the 8 political groups. At the moment, we have 75 MEPs from 17 different countries. I say at the moment because we're such a dynamic group, there are people knocking on our doors, and hopefully we're hoping to let in 1 or 2 members next week. I see that there have been a number of conferences in the European Parliament on terrorism and radicalisation, so I'm glad that you chose this one to come to. And for those who couldn't make it but are watching today on Periscope, I'm sorry, and I hope that the questionable Wi-Fi here does not drop out from time to time. If you are on social media, the 2 places to go, one is at ECR Group, all one word, and also hashtag Periscope, and also the hashtag for today's conference is hashtag extremism. So at ECR Group on Twitter, Periscope, and also hashtag extremism. The phrase "you ain't no Muslim bruv" I think summed up perfectly in one sentence what many politicians and fellow Muslims have been trying to say in speeches and articles for years. This man, confronting a would-be terrorist on the London Underground, set out how violence against innocent individuals is complete anathema to the faith that I and other people in this room follow today. But yet, for some reason, people kill senselessly in the name of God. I hope that today we will have a discussion on some of the drivers that lead to radicalisation. I hope we can talk about how we tackle that problem at its root. I hope that we can have a discussion on how we reinforce the message that there is no inherent contradiction between Islam and living in the West, or even between Islam and liberty. Working against radicalisation and promoting liberty within Islam are 2 projects very close to my heart. And I'm very pleased today that we have a project from my constituency of London, the Unity of Faith Foundation, to tell you how they tackle radicalisation at a community level using the power of sport. But looking at the drivers of radicalisation is critical. There is clearly no one single path to being radicalised, but there are some well-trodden paths that we can all investigate. Like the young person facing an identity crisis, perhaps caught between 2 cultures, their parents' culture and the culture of their host country, unable to access religious teachings in the mosque because maybe the imam in the mosque is preaching in a language that they are not too familiar with. He or she meets someone who offers them to come to a study group in the language of that country. And there they are told about the jihad, not about the internal struggle element of the jihad, but the external violent manifestation. And they're told that our good deeds must outweigh our bad deeds. And they may be told, how can we, at the end of our life, have more good deeds than bad deeds on that scale of justice? And when you live in a decadent West, with all this temptation, and with all this temptation around you. And then they are even angered by being showed pictures of what are purported to be Muslims being slaughtered by the West, or atrocities by the West. And then suddenly, out of all that angst, they are shown pictures, and they are told, there is a shortcut to paradise if you commit an atrocity. Sadly, that group gives them a sense of belonging, much like an international gang. But that's just one path. Another is a person preying on others who already have violent personalities. And that's probably one reason you see people quite often being radicalised in prison, supplanting one violent tendency for another. And there are many other reasons that I'm sure that will be talked about today and have been expressed in articles. So we need to work with the various Muslim communities to make sure that we identify these problems and tackle them at a grassroots level, at mosques, in our local communities, in our schools, in community organisations, the internet, and also state institutions like schools and prisons. But sadly, there will also be people who fall through that net. Frankly, these people present a serious danger to our security, to non-Muslims and Muslims alike. because they have the motivation and training to kill? How can we put in place an arsenal of tools to detect and stop radicalised people, often born and raised in not always deprived families, right here in our countries? That is important. But so is making sure that we get the correct balance between preserving our liberties and the security for our people. And how do we tackle some of the more thorny issues around intelligence, such as the issue of encryption? How do we ensure a free and open internet, whilst at the same time seeking out those people who use it to recruit and to spread hatred and propaganda? How much can analysts achieve using data? And how much intelligence work requires old-fashioned embedding of agents into potential terror cells, or just plain old-fashioned secondary research using public data? I hope that we can answer some of these questions today. And in our response to the violence committed by a minority of Muslims, we must not fall into the trap that demonises young Muslims, pushing them into the very spiral of an identity crisis and sense of not belonging that can make them targets for radicalisation. Remember, in many countries in the Middle East, Muslims themselves are as likely to be victims of terrorism as anywhere else. Whether it be Iraq, Syria, or even during the 7/7 bombings in London, there were Muslim victims of terrorism as well as a majority non-Muslims. So today I'm pleased to see that the IMAN Foundation has organised a very impressive lineup of speakers from across the world of diplomacy, politics, intelligence and community organisations to discuss the ways of tackling this issue at every possible level. I want to thank all of you for coming here today, and I want to thank our old friend Ribad Al-Assad, Stephen Jones and the team at the IMAN Foundation for organising this event. And if you forgive me, I'll have to excuse myself from some of this conference today because I'm needed upstairs for a rather grandly named Conference of Presidents, which is basically the meeting of the presidents of the political groups to decide the agenda for next week, but also we're meeting with Federica Mogherini, who's the High Representative of Foreign Affairs. I hope to be back by the end of the conference to hear the conclusion. Otherwise, I hope to speak to many of you at the lunch. But let me just end on a personal note. My eldest son was born on the 28th of August 2001. A couple of weeks later, I was sitting with my son in my arms, working from home, and a friend phoned me up and said, switch on the TV. This was September the 11th. I switched on and saw those images. And then as the day unfolded, it became clear to me that this was an act committed, supposedly, in the name of my faith. I became incredibly pessimistic and worried. I looked at my 2-week-old son, and I worried what sort of world I was going to be bringing him up in. I wasn't optimistic for the future. If we look at what's happened since then, fortunately, we have not allowed ourselves to be divided by those who want to divide us, whether they are the neocons or whether they are those who subscribe to the ideology of the Muslim Brotherhood. And what I think has become important is that we've carried on as before, communities working together, trying to tackle this together. In my own case, I went on since then to become the leader of the third largest political group in the European Parliament, the first Muslim to become a leader of the group. That's made me more of an optimist. I hope by talking about these issues here today that we will be able to make sure there are more optimists than pessimists as we tackle this real problem that continues to blight our societies. Thank you very much. So let's now begin our first panel discussion. I want to give each speaker about 5 minutes. I'm going to be fairly strict, and I have something to make sure I'm strict, to give some introductory remarks today. First, let me just quickly go through our speakers today. Marty Martin has an accomplished career, which includes service with the CIA, the NSA, and the US Army. I thought we might have met somewhere before. He's the CEO of Crane & Crane Consulting, and I'm told recently played a central role in HBO's Manhunt, a 2013 Emmy Award-winning documentary. As you can see, Marty's experience, I'm sure, will ensure that he addresses many of the issues that we're all excited to learn about today. Next one is Josef Bodansky, who served as director of the Congressional Task Force on Terrorism and Conventional Warfare of the US House of Representatives from 1998 to 2004. He's also Director of Research of the International Strategic Studies Association and has been a visiting scholar at Johns Hopkins University's Paul H. Nitze School of Advanced International Studies. Gosh, I got that out in one sentence. He has also served as a senior consultant at the Department of Defense and Department of State. And the Honourable Cyril Zavoda started his political career as an advisor to the Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia on issues of human rights, restitution and relations between church and state. Became a member of the European Commission for Democracy Through Law and the Council of Europe before becoming Vice President of the Legislative Council of the Czech government. In government, he held the positions of Deputy Prime Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Justice, Minister for Regional Development, Minister for the Interior, and was Chief Negotiator for EU accession. We also have the Honorary Hrant Bagration, who was Armenia's fourth Prime Minister and is currently Professor of Economics at the Russian-Armenian University in Yerevan. And do we have Alex Karl here?
He's not here.
Alex Karl is not here, but if he does come here, whether or not he comes here, the history is still the same. He's Senior Advisor on Iraq energy issues to the Bureau of Energy Resources at the US Department of State. Can I ask each panellist, please, to start with about a 5-minute contribution? I'll try and be strict. We have a clock, so we use peer pressure against you. Over to you, Marty.
As I was contemplating my comments this morning, I was watching, of course, the news, and I was listening to Saeed's comments just then, which accurately reflected almost every one of the issues that we need to address. First of all, it is not an us and them problem. It is a we problem. When I say we problem, I mean it is our international communities, the various countries represented in the room. A we problem meaning Muslims in our communities. A we problem meaning Muslims throughout the Middle East. A we problem meaning the victims in our youth. So it's oftentimes our leaders and some politicians, I won't be too rough on, attempt to simplify a us and them situation. It is a we situation, and the victims are all of us. And each of the tools that we need to use, from the intelligence to community outreach, to guard our loved ones, at the same time to guard our citizenry, need to be a very multi-dimensional approach. Of course, when we talk about intelligence and police work, we immediately targeting a specific group. Immediately, the first thing many of us begin to worry, besides success of the mission, is protection of civil rights. It's going to be a continuing struggle and a continuing balance, how to make sure that we can keep our citizens free, we can get the right amount of intelligence from the various sources of intimidation and recruitment, at the same time coming up with very effective means to counter that. Just listening to Saeed's comments, again, oftentimes people would say, well, let's just unleash the military, or let's unleash the police. Well, it's no simple answer. It's much more complicated than that. And I believe it involves not only accurate intelligence, but a very much an international cooperation among the various services, while at the same time understanding that we cannot push away our citizenry. When I say citizens, everyone fights about definitions: jihadists, Islamic extremism. They get caught up in the semantics, vice where their target is. The target is the evildoers, and the target for the evildoers are us, our institutions, our way of life, and our youth. And we need, in encountering that, it's not just a law enforcement intelligence resource that must be used. To me, it must be absolutely a community inclusiveness, a community outreach, and that we almost realize that we are the targets. Not only are again, Islamic extremists, jihadists, you can say the term that that describes how you feel, but the bottom line is, we all know that it represents a minuscule percentage of the Muslims around the world, and they've taken that message and turned it into a message of hate. Now, we could also, and I just want to point out, throughout history, today currently we have Islamic extremism. Back in the day, it could have been Protestant extremism. It could have been extremism with any other term in front of extremism. So that attack society looks for youths who are looking for identity, looks for victims, and attempts to impose its will on a normal, peaceful population. So I think it's important to understand, and again, I echo, because oftentimes someone from my background, immediately you think, well, that fellow has no understanding or sympathy for Muslims. Well, actually, throughout my experience, and when I became in the public light after the movie HBO documentary and others, here actually at the London Film Festival, I was always starting out my presentations with, it's absolutely imperative to understand that this is not Islam. It is a bastardization, it is a distortion of the message of the Prophet, and it is not representative of all of Muslims around the world, whether they have American passports, Saudi passports, Syrian passports, British passports. It doesn't matter. But that's the vehicle by which extremists are targeting us. And so I think, again, I know we have a 5-minute limit, and so I just want to point out that people, leaders, politicians love to come up with simple answers. There's nothing simple about this. It's complicated, it's multifaceted, and therefore the responsibility for all of us to contribute, whether it's through community outreach, through obviously law enforcement intelligence, or it's just by being informed citizenry. That way, when you hear someone saying, oh, it's all these Muslims, you as a private citizen, or you as a person can say, wait a minute, that's not Islam. That represents a bastardization, just another extremist, hate-filled vehicle by which people are trying to victimize fellow citizens. That's it.
Marty, thank you very much for your discipline. Thank you, and thank you for your wise words. Yosef, can I hand over to you for 5 minutes?
Okay. Comments from a cynic or practitioner who is politically incorrect. Look, we have about 1.5 billion Muslims in the world. Every fourth guy on God's earth is a Muslim. We cannot pick up a fight with all of them. So let's look at it at that point. Item number 2, there is a tremendous, profound difference, which I want to concentrate on, between law enforcement, which is the face of fighting terrorism that most of us see, and between intelligence. Law enforcement comes after the act. There was a boom, we're going to find out who did it, and we're going to throw the book at them, killing them or throwing them in jail, Guantanamo, what have you. But this is not the real objective. Intelligence and the goal of fighting terrorism is prevention. To prevent the boom from taking place, to prevent casualties, to prevent the friction, the hostility that comes afterward. And this is the role of intelligence, to prevent terrorism from taking place. Once there was a boom, intelligence failed. This is our failure as far as whether the law enforcement will find a guilty party or not become the secondary issue. Now, there are two specific levels within which intelligence work is taking place, and they are profoundly different. And the second, but which hopefully I'll have a chance to elaborate a little bit, is the one that is more complex, more sensitive, where I think there's the misunderstandings within the communities create the problems that we're having. The first level is the specific discovery of people who are preparing to go boom. This is going after individual cells. There's a lot of technological intelligence, monitoring of phones, cell phones, etc., monitoring of the internet, monitoring of individuals that are known or suspected, and hopefully will pick up the majority of them. But this is the last phase. This is people who are already committed and are in the process of doing something. In the US, we have a program of ensnaring them that sometimes borders on the legality of entrapment, but it has been absent the second issue, the actual prevention, better than nothing. I think the FBI has done more good than bad in that process. The key issue is prevention at the community level. And here we have to look a little bit at statistics that are not that complementary. The number of guys who are willing to blow themselves up or blow up something is small. It's throughout the world, it's in the tens of thousands, maybe 100,000. Again, out of 1.5 billion, you know. For each individual who is ready to go boom, there's about 20 individuals supporting him. Also, again, a minuscule number in the grand scheme of things. However, between 1% and 5% of the population, a Muslim population in the West, is showing sympathy and understanding to the perpetrators and are willing to provide help if asked to do so. They haven't broken any law, but they may in the future. In the Muslim world, in areas of contention, can be economic contention, can be ethnical contention, can be oppressive contention, not necessarily pure Islam or religious related, 20 to 25% of the community are willing to provide, to show understanding, support, and to provide help to terrorists should the need arise, or to the jihad should the need arise. This is a large segment. The role of intelligence is to understand the dynamics of these communities. We don't have any other choice but to penetrate community at large in order to understand the dynamics, to identify this 1 to 5% in the West, 20-25% in the hub of Islam, and through them convince them that they should have sympathy to something else, and through them to go into nascent networks, into people who are sliding into extremism from sympathy to active support, and from active support to actually going boom. The major challenge of intelligence, I see the time, is how to do it without demonizing community at large, without criminalizing the community at large, without disrupting the community at large, and with understanding that some of the frustration of the community is justified and warranted. Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, thank you. And for those of you who are watching at home on Periscope, or for those of you who just walked in, you're at the Perspectives on the Fight Against Islamist Extremism conference organised by the IMAN Foundation and the ECR Group. We are in the first panel, Intelligence and Diplomacy, the Hidden War. We've just heard from Marty Martin, the former CIA senior official and CEO of Crane & Crane, and also Josef Badansky, former director of the Congressional Task Force on Terrorism and Unconventional Warfare of the US House of Representatives. Our next speaker is Cyril Svoboda, former Deputy Prime Minister of the Czech Republic.
Chairman, thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. If you are in the Czech Republic, and if you ask people what is the most dangerous, the answer is that this is Islam. Paradoxically, in my country, the Muslim community represents about 10,000 people, nothing. Those who are applying asylum in the Czech Republic is about 150. That's nothing. But something is new in the Czech society. So Islam is perceived as something very dangerous. So something is new in Europe, maybe face-to-face, the migration. So, and if we are speaking that the most dangerous is the radical Islamism. So we have to unify in the conflict against radical Islamism. And it doesn't mean to find a way how to cooperate with Russia. Paradoxically, we need Russia. So why? Because we have to stop the war in Syria. We have to solve the problem in Ukraine. And I am deeply convinced that we have no chance to do that in the conflict with Russia. But it doesn't mean that Europe is to give up the position, or to lift up the sanctions and think nothing has happened. So, but this is the challenge for the Western countries, for Europe, and also for Russia, to demonstrate that we are capable of dividing the problem, saying that we are against radicalization and Islamization of the politics, we are against the radical Islam, but we defend the values we do represent. And it does mean to find a compromise and to be courageous enough to find a way how to find some compromise with Russia, because against Russia we are not capable of doing that. Thank you. That's my comment. Thank you.
My goodness, that really has set a precedent for others. Okay, so our next speaker is Hrant Bagratyan, the former Prime Minister of Armenia.
Thank you. I would like to give you some messages on what is happening today in the world. Well, sometimes you are feeling that, Jabal al-Nusra or Al-Qaeda is a temporary event. One day we will be able to stop these organizations, etc. But I think even if we will be successful in the fight against these type of organizations, in the coming 30, 40 years, especially in the Islamic world, we will see the creation, the birth of new organizations like these. I think there are some problems for that. There are some grounds for that, and these grounds, unfortunately, are very serious. Not to justify extremism, but I would like to mention the ground which creates that. First of all, the global gap between most developed countries and most poor countries is growing up. Of course, we have some good cases, China, India, but the global differences is growing up. By example, in Luxembourg, you have a 500 times better life than in Afghanistan. And one day, these Afghans will try to come to the Luxembourg. And it's growing up. In the global world, we have a global markets of goods, but we don't have a global markets of resources. Second, labor force is a resource. If among the Islamic countries you have 8 times more birth ratio, population growth, and you have 8 times less in the other countries, they have resources. One day, they should be exchange resources with people. And that's why we see this migration. This is a migration, of course, provocated and stimulated in a wide manners. But this is a migration. And that also should be solved. Take into the consideration that 100 years ago, we have had something like 250 million Muslims, 1.3 billion Christians. Now we have 2 billion Christians, 2 billion Muslims. The times of growth are higher. In the world, we have average population growth, 1.3% on average. We have 0.3 among Christian countries. And we have sometimes 4% among some Muslim countries like Nigeria or Tanzania or in Kenya or in Arabic countries, And the other issue is that if radical Islamism is not the way for Islam. What is Islam in fact? Don't compare Islam today with the Islam which you had 100 years ago, because they became more powerful. And it could be the case that extremism and extremist instruments will be used regularly in the battle of fight for resources. And my point is that if you have these additional resources of population, always it will create case for extremist case. I was, by example, just recently in Israel, and I had a chance to understand what is jihad, how it works. You have 2 kids in your family, an Arabic family, and then somebody came saying that you can have another 3 kids, but just one should participate in jihad. Don't tell him about that. When he will be 20 years old, we will tell him, but your family is going to get subsidies, And sometimes it's financed by the rich Islamic countries, and there is a segregation among Islamic countries. And then when he's getting 20 years old, parents told him that, my son, we are getting a lot of money and a lot of resources, and you should give your life to us. That's a way, that's a technology, to fight. We have to understand that was not the case 100 years ago. And don't compare Islam today with the Islam that you had 100 years ago. Today's Islam should be more aggressive, because the demand is how to equalize the participation and the distribution of resources, economic resources. This is my point. This is very global. The problem is more global, more fundamental than we can imagine for us. Thank you for your attention.
Well, thank you very much. And our next speaker, I'm pleased to say, Alex has made it. He's the Senior Advisor on Iraq energy issues to the Bureau of Energy Resources at the US Department of State, where he provides guidance and expertise on Middle East, with a particular focus on Iraq, a neighbouring country. He joined the State Department in the Office of the Science Advisor to the Secretary of State 4 years ago to work on transboundary security issues in Africa, the Middle East and South Asia. And Alex has agreed to shorten his remarks to 5 minutes. For all the speakers, they will have the opportunity when they answer their questions to get across hopefully some of the points that they were unable to get across in their opening remarks. Over to you, Alex.
Great. Thank you very much. I wanted to take this opportunity actually to share a concrete example, based on the title of the panel, where an example of intelligence that was then translated into action by the coalition to counter ISIL's extremist activities in Syria and Iraq. So, as most of you are aware, they're a ruthless organization, and as was mentioned, I focus on energy issues. And I think we're all well aware that they've stolen and exploited Syria's and Iraq's oil and gas, and they use this against populations. Not only against populations, but also as a symbol of their ability to govern. So just to take a step back, many of you may be aware that last spring, U.S. forces conducted a raid which killed Abu Sayyaf. This was in Deir ez-Zor. He was considered the oil and gas and financial emir of ISIL. And in that raid, the U.S. forces recovered actually a tremendous amount of digital media, documents, approximately 7 terabytes of information. And this is in fact more than any other raid in special operations history. Exploitation of the information is nearly complete at this point. And what we've discovered is through the documentation, there was tremendous insight gained into the leadership structure, the oppressive governance, and then details on how ISIL really sought to exploit Syrian and Iraqi resources for their own gain. The documents really do indicate that ISIL views control of energy resources as more than just a revenue source, which is really where the media has focused. Rather, controlling these resources represents a way for the terrorist group to legitimize its governance in the eyes of local populations. So whether that's through fuel deliveries, power generation and power delivery, it's really a point of leverage. However, ISIL really provided, or we through the documentation, we identified that there's tremendous centralization in the management of these assets. And along with that, they carefully vetted all personnel who were involved in those processes. So this is really an indication of the high value they place on energy resources as a central element of their vision for governance and for establishing a caliphate. And within the details of this, the Abu Sayyaf data really showed a specific business model that allowed ISIL to retain control and of not only the revenues, but the individuals and the resources. So they were quite fearful of corruption throughout the process, and really, not allowing the revenues or of these resources to be used outside of their purview. And what we also identified in looking at this information is the level of vetting that went into the oil field workers, and that much of this oil is sold just at the wellhead and then extorted and taxed on roads. So it really was not just a single point of revenue or leverage, but then at transportation within the caliphate, which really incentivized these resources, oil in particular, to be sold domestic, to be sold as close to the wells as possible. And through this information, we did not see evidence of exports of oil or deals arranged with the Turkish government going to Turkey. And the way the business model is structured, it actually incentivizes the middlemen who were not ISIL employees, the guys driving oil trucks, really to sell the oil as close to that wellhead as possible. So if you sell the oil 1 mile away or 20 miles away, ISIL gets the taxes and they get the wellhead revenue, but there's no incentive to take it to Turkey or to a global market. So it's really there to meet the domestic demand of the approximately 7 million people that were under their control over the past year. I see I'm running short on time. The other key point that I think was evident in this body of information is that ISIL, unlike Al-Qaeda or other terrorist groups, really is focused on the state-like structures. And I think you've heard that from a couple of the other speakers. And this leaves them with vulnerabilities, because when you desire a state-like structure, you also desire territory. Now, this is what allows them to harness and leverage the resources, but this also does leave them vulnerable to the responsibility that comes with managing those resources and distributing them to the people under their control. So I think we can turn to the Q&A, or I'll turn back to the moderator, but it should be evident that in the past few months, I think everybody's seen that the coalition's efforts have really been stepped up on this front. And we have more than 12 coalition partners that have been active in the airstrikes in Iraq and Syria against ISIL. And we've focused really on hitting key infrastructure. It's clear at this point that this has really reduced ISIL's revenues. And within Iraq, most of these airstrikes actually also focused on the bulk cash sites. So as long as ISIL holds this territory, we know we can't stop them. We can't stop the oil from coming out of the ground, right? This is an oil-rich region. When the wellhead breaks, the oil will continue to flow. So we know we can't stop that. But what we can do is force them to use more rudimentary, inefficient, and costly methods, reducing the volumes and reducing the revenues, and making it more difficult for them to benefit from stealing other people's resources. And so with that, I'll leave it to the moderator. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Alex, and thank you to all the panelists for keeping within time. That will give us a certain amount of time to take questions and answers. Just for those of you who are watching on Periscope, or those who have walked in recently, we are at the Perspectives on the Fight Against Islamist Extremism conference organised by the IMAN Foundation and the ECR Group. We're in panel 1, Intelligence and Diplomacy, the Hidden War. The speakers we've heard from Marty Martin, former CIA senior official, and CEO Crane & Crane, who talked about some of the ways of looking at Muslims and not lumping them all together as sort of some large monolith. We heard from Josef Bodansky talking about actually the minority of Muslims and actually trying to break down what some of those drivers towards extremism. Cyril Svoboda, the former Deputy Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, who talked about the sort of fear of Islam, even though there isn't a large Muslim population in the Czech Republic. We heard from the former Prime Minister of Armenia, Hrant Bagratian, who talked about the fact that the equalization of populations and the challenges that presents between Muslims and non-Muslims and Christians, and also some of the parents who have a large number of children with the intention that one of their children will go on to commit an extreme act. And finally, Alex Carl, who talked about some of the issues around energy and the way that ISIL, Daesh, ISIS, whatever you want to call them, use energy as a way to finance their extreme activities. We've got about 15 minutes. At 10:25, I want to stop the clock and hand over to Ribal to make the closing remarks for this session. To be honest, it should have been the opening remarks, but I was so keen to get started that I passed over him, and he has forgiven me. So we shall. Can I open it up to the floor? Does anyone have a question? Please let us know. Please say who you are, but also make sure that if your question is intended at one person or more than one, or for the whole panel. So I'll take the gentleman there first, and please, your question.
Press this button, or can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? My name is Potkinaz Amer. I'm a media consultant, TV producer, journalist. I want to give a very brief example and then ask my question, if I may. There's a very reactionary Ayatollah in Iran called Ayatollah Makarim Shirazi, a Holocaust denier who's put a fatwa against a rap singer in Germany. And he has representative offices and charity in London, where I live. He's not the only Iranian Ayatollah who's got representative offices there. I'm just using that as an example. He's received a grant from local borough of Brent for promoting religious freedom and tolerance. Have the politicians not failed the ordinary people by their pursuit of political correctness and just not being savvy enough to realise who they're providing infrastructure for, who they're providing schools and institutions and charities for? Are they not failing the general public?
Thank you very much for your question. And as a politician, I shall pass it on to the panel. Who would like to address that issue? Anyone here? Anyone here? No? Okay. No, please.
Okay. Ayatollah Shirazi is well known. There are others, as you said. There are similar institutions in the US, most European countries, and so on and so forth. The issue is, number one, the system, as far as intelligence-wise, is not geared for legal reasons, not operational reasons, to penetrate, to study, to collect the evidence needed to close down these institutions or these types of institutions. Until the laws in the name of political correctness, in the name of protecting democracy, freedom of speech, etc., are not modified and corrected to enable the law enforcement authorities to collect the evidence that they can then bring to the authorities and seek actions, this thing will continue. And I can tell you, without mentioning specific individuals or institutions, some of these institutions are not only involved in incitement, but are involved in laundering money to people who will go boom, by smuggling communication system to people who will go boom, for providing instructions, delivering material, delivering encrypted communication equipment to people who would go boom. The problem is far, far greater than just the incitement of these institutions.
Thank you. And anyone else on the panel want to answer? No? Okay. Maybe I should just give a quick perspective as myself, actually a member of the European Parliament for London myself. I think you've hit the nail on the head for many of the frustrations, I think, that the intelligence, but also the law enforcement agencies face. First of all, is actually the existing legal framework, and have they committed any crime under the current legal framework? And also how some people are very clever at staying on the right side of the law. So there are issues such as, you may be saying things that are illiberal, and I think the test of a liberal society is how much you are prepared to tolerate illiberal thought. But it's when, where does that individual cross that line? If they're inciting, I know you can come back. Are they inciting violence against particular individuals? Are they actually committing acts of violence? And the law is really struggling here. And also, if we're honest about it, we do have a number of what some people call the human rights lawyer industry, who get a kick out of defending some people that actually many of us would find unpleasant and want to be rid of. And I think that's the challenge, that when I speak to both law enforcement, politicians and lawyers, that's the challenge they face. I know you want to come back very quickly, but I also want to pass on the floor. I'll let you come back quickly, and then please come back. Lady there.
I'll tell you what, my voice does carry, so I'll speak. My name is Patty Goulet. I want to throw something on the table. There's so many different facets of this extremist movement. But if we go back to Boko Haram and all the girls that they abducted, one of the problems we face is that they are actually breeding the next generation of killers from childhood. The truth is, the abduction of the girls probably posed an embarrassment because there were so many of them. But it is happening in very small levels all over the world. This is one of our biggest challenges for the future, because this is the most evil thing that has happened in our generation. But I just wanted to throw that on the table to see what the panelists think of this.
Would anyone from the panel like to pick this up? You're gone. It's your job today.
I think everybody's throwing it at me. Look, as one who's been to Boko Haram's land quite a lot of time, it's unbelievable. Okay. This is part, again, go back to what I've said, that the issue of the prevention at the community level. Prevention is not just, okay, he's a bad guy, off with his head, to use Alice in Wonderland's term. It is also, because today, if we take out bad guys, but about 20 to 50 people running to fill in the shoes. In contested areas like northeastern Nigeria, Syria, Iraq today, you'll have a couple of hundred people running to fill the shoes of the dearly departed. No, we need to not only take out the bad guys, but we need to offer something else in between. There's been a reference here to the issue of inequality, economic frustration, and so on and so forth. There's also issues of social frustration, tribal identity, sub-state identity, a whole litany. It has to be done. It has to be done correctly. Right now, we're failing with the West, are failing from A to Z in addressing these issues. Talking about 20-some years of frustration. Thank you.
Amjad Bashir.
Amjad Bashir, MEP for Yorkshire in England. Thank you very much for being here today. I enjoyed your discussion very much. I am a Muslim. I emigrated to the UK when I was 8 years old, grown up in England, and I'm now an MEP. A lot of the remarks you've made have been very informative. I'm just a little bit frustrated that many people who are in the European Parliament who have misunderstandings of Islam and the religion are not present here today, because a lot of what you've said is about understanding. And I was in particular interested in what the former Prime Minister of Czechoslovakia had to say, because to say there were only 150 people seeking asylum in your country, and there were only at the most 10,000 people that were of Muslim faith living there, for your population to have such apprehensions about the Muslims must mean there's a lack of information, must mean there's a lack of understanding, must mean that people are misguided. And I think that is the case throughout the world. Many speeches, unfortunately, I hear in the European Parliament by parliamentarians who are supposed to be well-read and well-travelled are also misguided. So what do you expect of local people? So I think you've done great today to come and say that the Muslim people are being misrepresented, that the large majority of them are law-abiding, that there is a minimum number of people that are engaged in these terrorism that I abhor, terrorism that I condemn. ISIS, etc., do not represent Muslims nor Islam. Now, just one other thing. Nobody in this world brings children into this world so that they become terrorists and commit jihad. Nobody. They bring them into this world because of love and don't want their children to die on the altar of sacrifice. Jihad is a fight against oppression, and in particular against religious oppression, not worldly oppression. If you are denied access to participate in your faith, then you're allowed to fight against that injustice. It's a war against injustice. That's all. It does not give you any right to take a single life. In Islam, if you're waging a war, you cannot even harm a blade of grass. Just for your understanding, I think this is a great idea today. The IMAN Foundation is doing a very good job. I look forward to participating more in these sort of discourses. Thank you.
Before I invite anyone from the panel to respond, can I just say, Amjad, I think we also have a responsibility as well as Muslims to say, yes, the vast majority are peace-abiding and good citizens, but we also have to accept that there are people who commit these acts in the name of our faith. And I think we have to be quite clear. We also have to be quite clear about jihad, because jihad is not necessarily what different people have different interpretations of jihad. Jihad is a struggle. Quite often, it's an internal struggle to live a good life when there are temptations and other things in the external world. And that's as much jihad as anything that anyone claims is jihad. And I think we have to be quite clear about that and not say it's all about violence against the other, whether justified or whether in self-defense or in any other reason. There was a remark, I think, was probably addressed at some of the remarks you made about whether people are brought into this world for to commit acts. Do you want to respond to that at all? And also, does anyone else want to respond? Thank you.
My opinion is that things are changing during the time. Generally, I'm not against. I'm not pessimistic on Islam. I just would like to emphasize the new issues, especially economic issues. We have to understand why things are moving like this. But then again, I have seen a lot of things in my life, also my nation, Armenia, which was totally killed 100 years ago because we were Christians. And today, just last 3 months, we have got 23,000 Armenians refugees in Armenia from Syria. And these people, these Christian people, these Armenians in Syria, they were living there 1,500 years. And they were just killed because they are Christians. And nobody, when they were killing, when somebody kills you, nobody was explaining them. Wording during the killing, during this momentum, is gavur, is jihad, you know, and I agree with you. What is real jihad? But now how it's used, this how it's explained. We have to be attentive to that.
Mr. Swoboda, you want to come in as the...
Yeah. Thank you for your comment and for your question. In my country, so there's a very limited knowledge about Islam, because if you are asked, so if there is maybe some programs in the schools on Islam, so nobody is teaching Islam. So in my diplomatic academy, we have a special course on Islam. So how to understand Islam, that Islam is not dangerous for us. And Europe must be open to any religion. So this is the riches of Europe to be open. In my country, the problem is that the politicians are concentrated on so-called so they want to defend the Czech Republic against the new dangerous phenomenon. And it is easy to be in conflict with Islam and the Muslims if they are not in the Czech Republic. It's easier because it is a theoretical, it's a lip conflict. So we are speaking that you defend the Czech Republic against the migrants, against Islam, because the problem does not exist. So the political elite is concentrated on the present time to win the next elections. That's the problem. In my view, the Czech Republic is doing a very bad job. But in a very, very short time, so very soon, we will be confronted with the phenomenon of migration in my country, because it will continue and it will be more complicated in my country. So it's easy to be in the conflict with Islam if you know nothing about that. It's easy because you are ready to accept any comment, because you are very limited in knowing what Islam doesn't mean. So that's a problem, intellectual problem, it is cultural problem in my country, and of course it's a hot political issue to defend Czech Republic against non-existing or potential threat. So why the Muslims or why the migrants are not keen in staying in my country? Because the Czech laws are very strict, and it is very complicated to be welcome in the Czech Republic. And those who organize migration or immigration to Europe, they know perfectly that in the Czech Republic the legal climate is extremely difficult and extremely strict.
Thank you. I'm afraid we're out of time. I know you want to come back. Can I just make a suggestion, because we want to move on? The point you made about the extremists in London, the next panel on rule of law, protecting citizens and defending our values will also cover that issue. And the chairman of that panel is Charles Tannock, who's... Okay, fine. Please come back very quickly, because we want to move on.
The reason I used the example that I used, Yusuf, is because it was such an open and shut case. Sorry. Is that better? The reason I use that example is because it's such an open and shut case. Why is that? Because you go to the representative, Ayatollah Makarim Shirazi's representative office in London, there's huge posters of Ayatollah Makarim Shirazi, huge posters of the Supreme Leader. So they're not hiding who they're supporting. They're not hiding that he's a Holocaust denier. You can go to his website and see that. They're not hiding that he's issued a fatwa against a rap singer. You can go to his website and see that. So what is the UK authorities doing, spending UK taxpayers' money funding an Iranian Ayatollah?
Right, okay, thank you very much for that. Charles Tannock will be chairing next session. He's also an MEP for London. I'll be back later. Maybe you could raise this with us, and one of us could raise it actually internally within London and with the British government. Can I first of all thank our panel, those of you also watching on Periscope. That was a panel on intelligence and diplomacy, the hidden war. We heard from Marty Martin, the former CIA senior official and CEO of Crane & Crane. We heard from Josip Bodansky, the former director of the Congressional Task Force on Terrorism and Unconventional Warfare of the US House of Representatives. We heard from Cyril Swoboda, the former Deputy Prime Minister of the Czech Republic, Mr. Bagration, the former Prime Minister of Armenia, and Alex Carr, the Policy Advisor to the US Department of State. What I'll do in between this session and next is I'll ask Ribal to make some remarks, but can we just show our appreciation for the panel in the usual way? go now, and I'll hand over the chair. But what I will do before that is hand over to Ribal Assad, the founder and the chairman of the IMAN Foundation, one of the reasons that we've all been brought together to make some of his opening remarks. Thank you, Ribal.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Saeed, and thank you very much for the ECR group for hosting this conference for us today. And I would like to thank our distinguished guest for coming all the way here at this timely and important, conference. Walking around, the street of Brussels and Paris actually shows the severity of the problems that we are facing today. I have been calling for the past few years for the international community to come together, put their differences aside, to fight the danger and the global threat of Islamic extremism. Unfortunately, this has not happened. The biggest threats, it is our biggest threat that the world is facing today since the Nazis. And last year alone, we have seen attacks in the United States, in France, in Egypt, in Russia, in Nigeria, in Mali, Indonesia, and Iraq, and my own country, Syria, of course. There are those who believe that they are Islamists, moderate Islamists. Actually, I would like to make it very clear. There is a religion of Islam, which is a religion of peace, and there is Islamism, which is a perverted ideology of Islam, and which is shared by many extremist groups with the same perverted ideology. Those include, but not only, Boko Haram, Abu Sayyaf, Lashkar-e-Taiba, Hamas, the Muslim Brotherhood, Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra, the Islamic State, of Syria and Greater Syria and Iraq, and of course the list is endless. They all believe in establishing a caliphate, an Islamic caliphate under Sharia law, all over the Muslim world, but not only. They also believe in establishing from Andalusia, Spain, to Xinjiang in China. The US and Russia have lately decided to come together and to fight ISIS, and to a bigger extent, I think the Russians are fighting al-Nusra, and we have heard lately the bill that was passed, I think, in the US Congress against the Muslim Brotherhood to put them, to list them as a terrorist organization. But we cannot make an error of thinking that these are the only groups. We are not after a brand name here. We are after the underlying ideology. So we have to go after all who share the same perverted ideology wherever they are. They share different names. For example, in Syria, you have Ahrar al-Sham, Jaish al-Islam, and others, which many people are trying to label them as moderate Muslims or as allies of the West in the fight against, both the regime and the Islamic State. Let's not forget also that it was not, ISIS who committed 9/11. It was not ISIS who committed the 7/7. It was not ISIS who committed the Madrid bombing. It was not ISIS who committed the Mumbai attack, where Dr. Saeed Kamal, the chairman of the ECR group, was at the time. It was Al-Qaeda, and as you know today, it's Al-Nusra branch in Syria, which many people have been trying to promote as an ally that we could have to fight the Islamic State. This is unbelievable. You have someone, for example, like General Petraeus himself, who came out a few months ago and actually said that we have to work with al-Nusra to fight the Islamic State. This is really, I think it's unbelievable, and we should certainly not believe that any of those Islamist or extremist groups should be, should ever be considered to be our ally. And if we talk about, last, about the problem of refugees, which now Europe is facing, we have to understand that those refugees did not come directly from Syria. Those refugees were in Syria start leaving Syria 5 years ago, but they went into refugee camps in Turkey, in Jordan, in Lebanon, where they are living under terrible conditions. I don't know if you've seen the latest UN report about the UN refugees in Jordan. 86% of them live under poverty line. In Lebanon, for example, when I know personally, I've had, I witnessed a story lately of a child who just passed away 2 days ago because he had appendix and he was not admitted to any hospital in Lebanon. We had to through friends and contacts, to contact the Ministry of Health to get him admitted to one of the hospitals. But after his appendix exploded and there was nothing that they could save him. And now, after 1 month of being in hospital, he passed away. And they wouldn't even release the corpse to his father before paying $30,000. And this is the gravity of the situation. And this is only one case. Could you imagine how many refugees are going through that every day? Refugees in Lebanon are getting $18 a month on food coupons. How would you expect them to stay in those countries? Those people left Syria because they were looking for refuge. They were looking for dignity. They were looking for safety. And actually, we were not able to give them that. A lot of billions of dollars were spent in arming those jihadist groups from ISIS, Al-Nusra, Jaish al-Islam, Fatah al-Islam, Ahrar al-Sham, whatever, all those groups that you could name. But very little has been spent to give those people a better life. So of course they're going to try to flee. Of course they're going to try, they are risking their lives every day to come and live in the life that we are living here, today. But we also have to understand, unfortunately, that the European Union and the West in general does not have a proper screening process to know who are the people, who are those refugees that are coming into these countries. We have to welcome them, of course, but we also have to have a proper screening process to protect our own citizens and to protect those refugees themselves. Because if you have, you know very well that it's a perfect time for groups such as ISIS or Al-Nusra and others to send, sleeping cells. Jihadists, as one of ISIS members has actually bragged lately on one of the outlets, Buzz Media. So, he's given in interviews that they were able to send 4,000 jihadists into Europe alone in the past year. This is the danger that we are facing. And this is, you start hearing now voices in the West calling for the necessity of talking, for example, to the Syrian regime. Why? Not because they want to talk to a dictatorship, of course not, but because they need to work with someone who could give them an idea of who those refugees are. You know very well that it's already very hard enough for our countries here, or for our governments in the West, to follow our own citizens, to know which ones are going to fight with ISIS or Al-Nusra and others. Sometimes we find out why, because some of them are, sorry to say it, but stupid enough to post pictures of them on Facebook or tweeting about their whereabouts or posting a video. That's how we find out about it, or someone from their family reporting them. But other than that, it's very, very difficult to find out what our own citizens are doing. Could you imagine if you have, from what we heard, that there will be 1 million refugees, coming into Europe, to find out where they come from? Are they even genuinely Syrians? Where were they before they came? Did they leave? Are they pro, against the regime? We have no idea about all of these questions. So thank you very much for being here today again. And please, if anyone wants to ask any further question, I'll be here through the rest of the panels. Thank you very much.
This session and be replaced by the next session panelists, if they could come up to the podium. Yes, please. Yes, of course. How are you? Sorry. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're running 5 minutes late now, so I think I will start this session. This is the second panel of the morning, and my name is Charles Tannock. I'm also from the ECR Group, an MEP representing London for the United Kingdom Conservative Party, and I have a long history of being very interested in the issue to do with Islamism, extremism, radicalization, both of our homegrown jihadists, but also what's happening in countries in the Middle East and North Africa. I've had a long history of involvement with the minority communities, particularly the Christians, but more recently the Yazidis, because I happen to be chairman of the friendship group in this parliament of Kurdistan, and I was at the front line 6 months ago seeing the ISIS front line. And I've also did a report last year, the opinion on the main report from Libya on radicalization of EU citizens and how to try intervene early in the process, detect individuals at risk from the communities and find measures that we can bring to bear which will reverse that process or contain it or prevent them joining groups such as ISIS in Syria and Iraq. So this is something of particular interest to me. The title for this panel is The Rule of Law, Protecting Citizens and Defending Our Values. And we have a very distinguished panel. It's just got bigger. We have 6 speakers now, so I'll have to ask you to restrict yourselves to about 5 minutes. I've also been asked to send greetings to those who are watching us on a live stream process through Twitter at the hashtag Periscope. This is all new to me. I think it's great that we can all do it through Twitter now. And also, if you do wish to tweet about anything that's been said, to mention the ECR Group, at ECR Group as the handle, and also the hashtag extremism, so that as many people can follow what we are doing today in the European Parliament, not just in Europe, but globally for that matter, because that is the modern world we live in of instant social media communication. But I have a lot of pleasure in introducing our first speaker today, Christina Oyuland, who was a colleague of mine in the previous legislature, who was a former foreign minister of Estonia, and we worked closely together, I remember in the past, on matters to do with Central and Eastern Europe, particularly Ukraine, and the threats posed by Putin's Russia, which is as big a threat today as it ever was. And so the floor is yours, Christina, for around 5 minutes, if possible. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Charles, and I also would like to start thanking ECR Group offering such a kind of opportunity for us to have a meeting here in the European Parliament. I think this is the honor also for IMAN Foundation. I would start with the remarks like my colleague from Czech Republic, Kirill, said few comments on the current situation in his country. I would say that I'm from Estonia, and we have about 10,000 Muslim people living in our country. The whole population is 1.3 million. And these people have come to Estonia during the Soviet time mostly, and they are peaceful and normally so far, at least until the last year when all this mess started, we felt very confident living side by side with these people. And it was, so far it was easy because everybody respected the rule of law, the laws. And this is fundamental. I think that the biggest issue now, among others in Europe, what we are facing with this huge migration is exactly how to defend how to defend the laws, the traditions, how to keep the security for people in Europe. I think that when we speak about the rule of law, more and more, I feel that we should start to speak the rule of fear. I think there is a big fear around European countries, and I see two lines, or if I may say so, of the fear. First of all, normally people are afraid of their own personal security, security of their children, security of their wives, and they think that how the life can go on, how they can make business, how can the kindergarten teachers go safely home. In the evening in Finland, for example, the pepper gas is distributed for kindergarten's teachers in some towns because it's simply dangerous. It's a fear, it's a rule of fear that what we are facing, and we don't know how to tackle, how to live with this now in further. It's fact that the crimes, rapes and killings are like a daily business, at least in Nordic region, in my neighboring countries, in Sweden, in Finland. And even yesterday I met one member of here at the Belgian Parliament. She told me that she is hesitating, she's afraid to go alone to the public transport in the late evening hours. She says that normally after 5 o'clock she doesn't take any public transportation to go home because she is not sure, she is not confident in her own country. And this is, I think, what is a danger, that if Europeans who have used to live here in peace and in security under the rule of law, if now the Europeans in their own countries are not confident what is the future, if they can live safely. So I think that this is first, yes, the first line is like the personal security, and the other fear what is growing is the fear of Europeans is the process and the policy of Islamization Europe. This is also what we have to speak openly. And when we see what, for example, I quote just from October 2015, the head of the Islam Cultural Center in Latvia, in Riga, Abu Umars Hamza, said openly, publicly in his interview that in 50 years Latvia will be an Islam country. Then it's serious. I mean that this of course spreads the other type of fear of Europeans. What will be their future? Shall we remain at all in majority? Again, from Antwerpen yesterday I got the information that in Antwerpen, which is the big city here in Belgium, 52% of children in elementary schools are not Belgians, not Europeans. 52% in 2016. What will be in 10 years' time? So we don't have a strategy. Just to conclude, I think that Europe really missed the strategy. What to do? The borders are open. We don't have the strategy for education. And by the way, I should say that these Muslims living in Estonia, I think the basic thing why they are peaceful and following the rule of law, this is because they are educated. The education is very, very important. Nobody probably even is able to think today in this mess how we should reorganize the education in Europe to live peacefully side by side with these newcomers after 50 years. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christina. And I was just thinking about what you were saying, but also in the past, you and I worked so strongly together on the issue of Russian expansionism, and I think that President Putin is playing on this fear in Syria right now because he is bombing mainly the moderates. He wants to destroy the middle, and he wants to give a clear choice to the West between ISIS or Assad's regime, and I think this sort of fear clearly is uppermost in people's minds, but President Putin is clearly capitalizing on it in the wider Middle Eastern conflicts. And of course he is also encouraging, by the bombing that he's doing, an exodus of more people from Syria heading towards our shores, knowing that that's going to destabilize our continent, putting more fear, particularly at a time when my country is going through a Brexit campaign regarding whether or not we stay in the European Union. So there's all sorts of consequences from these fears in people's minds. The next speaker is Boris Tarasuk. I have huge pleasure in introducing Boris. a former foreign minister of Ukraine, distinguished member of the Verkhovna Rada, and who once interpreted for me, standing in Maidan more than about 10 years ago now, 11 years ago, during the Orange Revolution, from English into Ukrainian. The floor is yours, Boris.
Thank you, Charles. Although my party in Ukraine belongs to another family, EPP family, but I would like to use this opportunity to express gratitude to ECR for hosting this roundtable. And I would like to express gratitude using this opportunity to ECR for their consistent position as to support of Ukraine, democracy in Ukraine, and taking a very clear position as to Russian aggression against Ukraine. Thank you to your party, to your group, Charles, and to you personally. Speaking about the rule of law, protecting citizens and defending our values, I would like to say that there should be a unity between both, protecting citizens and defending the values. But what we do see today, from September 11, 2011, well, nowadays, already for 2 years, we see a kind of contradiction between protecting civilians and defending the values. The massive inflow of refugees to the countries of the European Union is constituting a serious humanitarian, security and political problems to the countries of the European Union. And this may lead to a serious changes in the countries of the European Union, to political changes with serious consequences among the EU member states. Needless to say that the rule of law under the occupation and under aggression cannot be spoken about, and this is the case with regard to Russian aggression against Ukraine and Russian aggression in Syria. I dare to say that Russians are violating the rule of law which did exist in the occupied now Crimea. They are violating the rule of law in the occupied Donbas, where they are waging the war against us, Ukrainians. And speaking about the Muslims in Ukraine, there are around 3 million Muslims in Ukraine, which constitutes 6.6% of our population. And I'm happy to say that in Ukraine we had never problems with Muslims, neither in the past nor today. Moreover, the majority of Muslims are represented by the Crimean Tatars, who are now under persecution by Russian occupying authorities in the Crimea. And this is the serious threat to not only to Muslims, but to the Crimean Tatars, the whole population of indigenous populations in the Crimea. How to tackle the problem nowadays? I think that we have to look at the root causes of the inflow of hundreds of thousands and millions of refugees from the Middle East to the European Union. We have to look at the root causes of Russian aggressive behavior, not only against Ukraine and in Syria, but the Europe over. And we have to look how to find a balance between the public security and the values. This is a very serious challenge to the European countries and to the peoples of the European countries. And I think that one of the way out should be the World Forum, where the leaders of public opinion would establish a dialogue between the different religions in order to find a solution and how to transfer these views to their respective societies and the communities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Boris. And I totally agree that the policy that Putin has done in the Crimea of expelling the leadership like Mr. Jumalyov of the Crimean Tatar community is a very dangerous one, because it will encourage radicalization by the Tatar community, who may well be led to joining more jihadist international movements against the Russian occupation of your territory. I also believe that Putin has this belief that all the jihadists from the North Caucasus are best held pinned down in the Syrian theatre of war, in the killing fields there, rather than have them return to the North Caucasus. One of the reasons why he has been so actively involved in the Syrian conflict. The next speaker is Maria Sergeyeva, sorry if I didn't pronounce it correctly, former Deputy Minister of Justice from Bulgaria. The floor is yours, Maria.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, I will start with two figures which have impressed me, and namely that every minute 8 people flee their homes to escape conflict or persecution. Every minute 8 people. Yes, we are living in turbulent and challenging times. The refugees for Europe are not only challenge for the infrastructure and economy, because they need access, and they pretend to have access to work, to shelter, to education and healthcare, but because also of the social frustration and fear in the European society. We experience this reaction of non-acceptance by normal people who are not against the refugees, who are not against the human rights, who are not xenophobes, but because of their social fear, because they feel somehow disappointed of lack of the understanding and acceptance of their own culture. Putting as a base this sentence, different cultures or crush of different cultures, I tried to go deeper and deeper to the core of the two cultures. I'm saying European culture. I'm not saying Christianity or Islam within Europe, or the different religions in Europe. I'm saying general the European culture and the Islamic culture outside Europe. And going deeper and deeper to the core, I think I came to a very simple result. In the core of the European culture, it doesn't matter what religion it is the law and the primacy of the law. In the core of the Islamic culture, outside Europe, is the religion and the primacy of the religion. The religion is over the law, and we have a very strange situation in which the president can say, I don't accept the decision of the Constitutional Court. What does it mean? Does mean the same, that in Islam outside Europe, there is the primacy of the religion instead the primacy of the law. And I think, speaking about the rule of law and protecting the citizens' right in Europe, but not only, in Europe, but not only for the Europeans who are here now in Europe, but also for the refugees who are coming to Europe, we can succeed if you can start a parallel campaign. Next to the human rights protection, I think we should start the campaign and new additional strategy to focus on the law. Put the law first and respect the primacy of the law. It doesn't matter if they are the Europeans or the new coming refugees. Put the law first and respect the primacy of the law. On this case, we can succeed to avoid the clash between the two cultures and to live in peace in Europe. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for that very clear message. And of course, Bulgaria has a very large, Islamic community of Turkish origin for centuries. So you've coexisted peacefully and not so peacefully at times for a very long time. It's interesting, in my country, of course, there was a big debate a few years ago when there were demands to make certain aspects of Sharia law integrated into our legal system. And there was a big debate with the Archbishop of Canterbury, who in my view wrongly said that was possible, because I think it's a very tricky one to then say what is and what isn't. And I always like to quote, and I'm not always a fan of this court, but the European Court of Human Rights, in a judgment in the 1980s, when there was a case brought by Turkish Islamists who were members of the National Parliament at the time, in which they said that the Sharia law in general was, and certainly certain aspects of it, was incompatible with fundamental human rights in a European sense. And that is a judgment which, to my knowledge, still rules today. And we need to remember that, particularly when you compare the Cairo Declaration of Human Rights of the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, which cites Sharia law as the fundamental basis of human rights within Islam. This is a big issue, and I think it's going to come up time and time again in the future. On that note, I give the floor to a very distinguished speaker indeed, Bertie Ahern, a former Taoiseach or Prime Minister of the Republic of Ireland. The floor is yours, Bertie, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chairman Charles, and again, thank you to your group for having us here, and to Rabal for having us all with the IMAN Foundation here as well. Just a few points. I think I meant to say a few words on the next issue as well, so I'll try and not mix up the two. But on this section on the rule of law, protecting our citizens, defending our values, I think they're all straightforward. I mean, we all in our countries expect people to abide by the rule of law, whether it's a local law, whether it's a national law, whether it's a human rights international law. In my country, we have now, from a position of very few Muslims, now we have a lot. I mean, our working population, when I was a member of Parliament first, the non-Irish element was 1%, which were mainly from probably the UK. Now it's almost 15% of those that work in Ireland are from elsewhere, and would include 60 or 70 countries. So, but there are few tensions, there are few difficulties, and we have a large Nigerian, for our size, a large Nigerian population, and by and large people work together and get on together. I just want to. I'm not going to disagree with anything that was said about the attack on terrorism and ISIS and Boko Haram and Al Qaeda, and we've a number of experts, and everything they said that we have to challenge these groups. But I'd like to spend just my few minutes on just a slightly different angle. It is amazing to me, and coming from where I dealt with various terrorists and extremists for many years in my own country, to try and bring them around to see some sanity. But wherever there's conflict, there's never a problem with the budget for law and order, for tackling crime, for tackling terrorism. Enormous budgets are rushed through parliaments. Vast amounts of people are put into frontline intelligence to try to deal with these issues. When in peace times, those that are trying to work and interact with communities on the ground have to run charity events and beg to try to get tiny amounts of money to try to educate extremists. And if we were to look at a longer vision of how we're going to tackle these problems. And even where there is conflict, and even where we're supporting if the Syrian, God knows what the Syrian war will have cost at the end of it. But there's so little put into trying to deal with those that are becoming radical and extremists from a young age. And as long as we do that, we shouldn't actually be surprised that we breed terrorists. And this is the difficulty. I've seen it in Northern Ireland, where we went into communities that were for generations bringing people out of communities, and that were people that would drive a car bomb, people that would shoot somebody on the other side of an area that was against them. But when the resources were put in to bring these people together, to try and educate them from a young age, the results can be quite amazing. And I do think, Chairman, while going on with all of the intelligence and all of the fighting and all of the wars and dealing with people who are trying to stir it up, internationally, if we do not really try to take this in and the root causes, which is the next debate, but try not to avoid that. But if we don't try and get into that, we're not going to make success. Can I just say that in the Syrian war and what's happening in Ukraine, what's happening in Libya, what's happening in Iraq, what's happening in Turkey, that we have so many conflicts, and I think what Rabal has been making speeches for the last 5 years, very good ones, not always listened. I think maybe more listened to now. We're in a far more troubled world, and that's leading to the migrants. The migrants is leading to more instability. It's playing right into to Putin's hand. I'd say that he feels now that he has turned the cards and tables around hugely on where he was 12 months ago, where all of the pressure was on him with all the sanctions. And now he is sitting back in a rather comfortable position, and that's happening elsewhere as well. There are people turning around the tables. The international community, in my view, has not been brilliant over the last few years. International leaders have been, many of them I know very well, but they try very hard, but we haven't made much success. And these issues are just clouding up more and more problems. And in your own country, Charles, it's working against. It's working against you as well, which has a knock-on to us. And really, on two fronts, I think we need the international community trying to work together in a more coherent way. And on the other side of it, we need resources put into communities, and those, not those who are trying to promote terrorism, as one of the questions was asked earlier on, but into trying to help those who might take radicalism out of communities. And it can be done, and it's not been attempted anywhere or anything like it should be.
Well, thank you very much, Bertie, for those pearls of wisdom from a very distinguished former statesman of the Republic of Ireland. And certainly, as a sort of foreign policy specialist, that the laws of unintended consequences with interventions keep on haunting us. I mean, we went into Iraq, the West, to get rid of a tyrant. We went into Libya with the same agenda, but we have created a series of destabilizing events which are now causing huge problems to the European project itself, actually. So we have to proceed with great caution before we think of action in future of a military kind. The next speaker is Frank Heinrich, who is a member of the German Bundestag. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. In Germany we have a saying, I don't know how to translate it best, wer fragt führt. Who asks the right questions leads. Now what I try to do is, as we have more questions than we have answers, to have some questions to the topic. Germany may have some answers, but we have much more questions, even if it looks different. Germany can answer some of these questions, but it meets all of us. Somebody in the first round said something about the multidimensional approach. You said that. And one of the dimensions is the national, European and worldwide approach. So there is that tense in the topic of this panel between security and values. Big discussion, not just in the last 8 months. One value besides that has been mentioned, the law, is, and that is one of the founding values in Germany. It is liberty, it is freedom. And we heard about human rights, it's freedom of expression, religion, and more. And I would use an image, you know, having liberty and security like a Libra or a pair of balances. And I think that has come out of balance. And we need to adjust that system again, that value system, to calibrate that. And we have to be very honest, and that says that we haven't been for a long time. In Germany, this is a core value, as I said. In our national anthem, it says unity and rule of law and liberty. And you can imagine why unity is in there. After the experience of the Third Reich and the time of the socialist dictatorship, the founding law, we still have that founding law that was created right afterwards. And it's called the Liberal Democratic Fundamental Order. There it is again, law. And the president we have, Mr. Gauck right now, spoke and wrote about liberty, freedom and responsibility, which means if we want to secure our freedom on the one side and the law on the other, and the security on the other, which is not the opposite. Everyone has, and the state, the society has to take responsibility for what they can. And I think Europe hasn't done a good job. We heard that in some quotes. And Germany hasn't. And we see that in some examples in the last months. You know, the Paris national game that we had to play. And the week after, you could say we bowed before this threat, the fear that you've been mentioning, because we cancelled one of the games that came afterwards. But there was an actual security situation. We will not bow before the threat of the fear, but we have to secure for our persons. Cologne, as you all have heard, changes had to be done. It shows to our faces that we didn't do well enough for our people. And we have to upgrade police, personnel and education-wise, and laws to look better after security in a small scale and in a big scale. But because liberty ends where crimes happen, and in Germany it's not the crimes. We are a lucky country in the moment. We didn't have that much of terrorists yet. But there is a big scale hatred speech in all areas. I couldn't believe I'm in my own country sometimes if I look not just into Facebook. So we're in a race, what I feel, to go back, to find our track back, which overwhelmed us, that we didn't know that the order wasn't secured well enough. And the race is between these incidents that could happen on the one side, the political change that's happening, the extremism and terrorism, and on the other side, the way back into order, acceptance of the rule of law, and our people that believe that we are on the right track. Because to a certain extent, we already lost some of our peoples, of not just voters. So in this globalized world, freedom and liberty will not just be thinkable, and we should not just think it in the small scale, personal, but also national. Question of trade agreements, question of forced and controlled migration. There has to be a rule of law there as well, as it is in war situations, but even there we have the international human rights. And so to end, protecting citizens and defending our values, Germany needs, maybe others as well, to go back to redefine our values. I would like to have a real new discussion in my country. Maybe that should be done in Europe as well. But at the same time, we need to reshape our society. And we heard in the beginning, we need to take up this fight all through society, the mosques and the churches and the schools, and even into legislation. And I want to quote Mr. Dr. Zaid, who said a few minutes ago here on the chair. He said, we need in this more optimists and less pessimists. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. The last speaker on this panel is Mr. Šefčovič, who is a former Premier of Serbia.
Thank you. I will try to make my contribution short in order to stick with the time, and there are already too many panelists in this panel. I'm coming from Serbia. As you all know, Serbia is one of many Balkan countries, and Balkan, on the other hand, is famous for its history, complexity, and especially if you look, Balkan is actually in the middle between the influences of the East and the influences on the West, and especially the disintegration of former Yugoslavia in the last decade of the last century was very painful, and war and all negative that I can say about that. So this region, and especially Serbia, is still known for those negative events. In fact, 5 years ago, when the war in Syria started, because of the similarity of the names, I heard from many people not very familiar with geography saying, oh, not again. Because Serbia, war in Serbia and war in Syria. If you look at the population of Balkan countries, you will find that there are actually three religions. One is Eastern Christianity, then Western Christianity, and Muslims. There are many countries, and there are some of them with the majority of Eastern Christianity, with the others majority Western Christianity, but there are also majority with Islamic population. When I was reading the title of this panel, especially the part which reads Protecting Our Values, I was asking myself, what are our values, meaning if we are people coming from Balkans. So obviously our values are old. I mean, the Christianity, both Eastern and Western, and Islam. So the answer on this question is actually we need a definition in order to know what to protect. And since we have heard during this panel also the other important definition like liberty, freedom, rule of law, I would like to contribute with one addition which I believe is at least equally important, and this is tolerance. And I think that our values in Balkans, probably in Europe, should be tolerance, and if we look at that as the main value, then it will be much easier to explain that we are not against Islamic people, but intolerant Islamic people, and also we are against intolerant people from any religion and any country. This was what I wanted to contribute. It might look slightly verbalistic, but essentially if you look at what are the weapons of IMAN Foundation and similar institutions, actually the weapons are words, culture diplomacy, and trying to release message for a joint life of people with the tolerance. Thank you.
Well, thank you for those words from a part of Europe which had terrible wars only 2 decades ago, partly along religious lines. This is the end of the formal session from the panel members. I now throw it open to the floor for some questions and answers session. I see a gentleman over there. He's the first. Anybody? A gentleman over there. So I'll take in that order, that gentleman, that gentleman, and that gentleman back. So perhaps you also say who you are and identify yourself before your question.
You said
and is it directed to the whole panel or a particular member?
A couple of brief comments that start with Serbia. You have a region called Novi Pazar that I've been traveling in quite a lot since the early 90s. You go to Novi Pazar, you find this is a Muslim populated region. You go, you find a growing number of schools and universities opened by Saudi jihadist or Islamist foundations. You find Turkish-sponsored bookstores in which the Turks are running a extremely expensive translation program just close to Sarajevo, where they translate the writings of all the luminaries of jihadism, Islamism, and so on and so forth, including books by Bin Laden and etc., which are then sold in very, very cheaply throughout Novi Pazar. My experience is that the number of such stores is growing from year to year. The volume of books purchased is huge. This shows that there is a transformation of the community, and it's not a good one. It's a very dangerous one. You cannot block it because it's a freedom of speech. You cannot block people from going to university because there's a freedom of speech. But there is a ticking bomb there, because while the majorities may be pissed off and read it because they're just pissed off at society, there will be a minority as a result of this radicalization that eventually will go boom. And society, we must protect society against that process, whether we like it or not. Issue number 2, quickly about Germany and the rest. I'm sorry, guys, but if one have to choose between rape, groping, etc., and between sensitivity, we have to go after the crimes, even if we show insensitivity to the newly arrived migrants.
I understand you're Mr. Putansky from the United States of America. I don't know whether our colleague from Serbia would like to comment. Certainly, I can say I'm the shadow rapporteur for Macedonia and know the Western Balkans well. I'm the Montenegrin rapporteur. Certainly, the issue of Saudi and certain Gulf states like Qatar-funded hardline Wahhabi Salafist mosque building in Macedonia has been a cause for concern, because traditionally the Albanian community and the Roma community are secular, although nominally Muslim. They're not particularly devout, but there has been a kind of process of radicalization, intended or not intended. I think that is a big problem in the region, but perhaps you could perhaps comment on what I've just said and what the gentleman asked.
Just an explanation, probably you do already know, but for the others. In Serbia, there are like maybe 5% of population is Islamic, maybe a little bit more, a little bit less. However, they are divided in 2 groups. One group is the group which recognizes the Serbia as the center of Islamic people. And then the other group that believes that Sarajevo, which means Bosnia and Herzegovina, is their normal center. And this other group, which is looking at Bosnia and Herzegovina, because in Bosnia there are much more Islamic population, I think maybe, I'm not sure whether it is majority, but surely close to 50%. So this other group is somehow more radical than the group which is looking at Serbia as their home. When I was, and they're hating each other, when I was Prime Minister, we wanted to include all of them to participate. So I had actually two ministers, one from one group and the other from the other. And the cabinet session of the government was the only table at which they were sitting together because they hated each other and they didn't want to even talk to each other. Now, to answer your question, we in Serbia, our official intelligence and, I don't know, the police statement is that we should be cautious, but there are no immediate threats for Serbia. So this is at least what is released recently.
It's an interesting statistic that Albania has had quite a good policy because last year not a single Albanian jihadist departed to join ISIS according to their statistics. The previous year it had been about 20 or 30, and yet Montenegro, tiny Montenegro, which I know well as the rapporteur, had about 4 or 5. So there are active measures being taken in the Western Balkans to address this issue. The gentleman over there, perhaps you could say who you are first, sir.
My name is Rabbi Herschel Gluck. I'm the founder and chairman of the Muslim Jewish Forum in the UK, which I founded in 2000 before the current wave of terror and problems. And it's interesting, I founded it following doing a lot of work in peace and reconciliation in the Middle East and in the Balkans. So, and I thought to myself, now, is everything okay in the UK? Is everything okay in Europe? And I thought, it's okay, but more needs to be done. And I think that the choice of this session, rule of law, protecting citizens and defending our values, is very apt. Because there are two elements in play here. One is rule of law. But the rule of law isn't in a vacuum. It's not in isolation. It's regarding protecting citizens. Citizens are citizens who come from a Christian background, from a Muslim background, from a Jewish background, and from many different backgrounds. And we don't want to impose one worldview and one attitude in any sphere on the citizens of Europe. We want to have a liberal Europe where people of different backgrounds can behave in a particular way according to their choice. And defending our values. Defending our values is a very interesting term. What are our values? And I say our, even though I look as a Jew, I speak as a Jew, I act as a Jew, but I'm a European. My family has lived in Europe for thousands of years. So our values cannot be shrunk to the values of a particular small minority of European citizens. Our values is the Christian, Muslim, Jewish ethos, which is at the core of European culture, of European civilization, and European history. And I think that when we speak about the rule of law, and we look at the great European tradition of allowing various peoples to live in this continent, and through thousands of years of war, we have realized that the way forward isn't through conflict, it's through bringing people together. It's through sharing, it's through understanding the other, it's through working with the other. And that's the idea which I felt lays at the core of the Muslim Jewish Forum. The Muslim Jewish Forum is, we don't deny there are differences, and very strong differences, in religion, in political views, in our attitudes towards the situation in the Middle East. But we are all European. We're all British citizens. We're all French citizens. We're all German citizens. And therefore, there is more that unites us than divides us. We have to look at the issues that bring us together and start from that point, not from the point of division, but the point of unity. And then from that point of unity, we can find a way how to cope and how to deal with the issues that divide us.
Well, thank you, Rabbi. Those are very fine words. I think it wasn't really a question, it was more of a kind of philosophical aspiration which we could all sign up to today.
It was a bit of a question as well, because I was referring to certain remarks made by certain of the panelists today. So therefore it wasn't said in an abstract fashion, it was said in reaction to certain remarks.
Well, let me just take two more questions, and then I'll ask three more questions. We'll bunch them together, and perhaps we could answer them together as appropriate. The gentleman there, followed by Mr. Bashir, my colleague from the ECR, and that one, and that. And gentleman over there, very quick, please, because we're running out of time now.
My name is Konrad Janik, and I have a question for all speakers, all panels, but also for Mr. Martin. A few months ago, media reports that some terrorist group, for example ISIS, get money from many rich people from Europe and USA. Why secret service of these countries didn't detect these people, and why they didn't cut the power financing? Is it possible that the people can have a relationship with the refugee policy of Europe?
Okay, one question there. Is ISIS getting money from sources within Europe? I think, who was the next one? I think it was this I think it was Mr. Bashir first, wasn't it? Then you, and then one last one over there. Amjad, the floor is yours.
Right. Good morning. As I mentioned earlier, emigrated to England in 1960. I've had to integrate. A great deal has been said about people that unfortunately are having to seek refuge in Europe. Now, I think integration is very important to dispel fear. Somebody mentioned fear two or three times. I think the first thing people have to do is to learn the language of the country that they come to live in, learn the culture and the history of that country. Then equally they can be successful in that nation. I think one or two remarks have been made that I must address. Judeo-Christian values are said again and again to be the backbone of Europe, and I concur with that. But Islam is an extension of that, like the good rabbi said earlier. To be a good Muslim, you have to have good Judeo-Christian values at your heart, because Islam believes in the Torah and the Injil and goes on to extend to the Holy Quran. So there is no divergence, there is no disagreement between those values. And a Muslim that, like I am, and others who are fleeing here now, that live in Europe, must live by the land, by the laws of the land that they come and live in. That is central to Islam. They must be also loyal and faithful to the land that they come and live in. That is central to Islam. So let there be no disagreement on that one. Let there be no misunderstanding of that. Somebody on the panel said that the Tatars have a potential to become Islamic radicals. Well, I beg to differ. In France, when they fought against the Nazis, they weren't Christian extremists, they were freedom fighters. So in the same way, if the Tatars do fight against injustice and occupation by the Russians, they're not Islamic extremists, they are Tatars, they are good Ukrainians fighting for their independence. Let's not mix the two. I was fortunate to have during the Bosnian War, I was in London, and I met the Grand Mufti, the Muslim Mufti of Bosnia, and a question was raised to him that in spite of all the killings that are taking place in Bosnia during the civil war, all the rapes that are taking place, will you ever go back to a united Bosnia and live with the Christians or the Serbs who have done this to you? And he gave a marvelous answer. He said, even if my heart says that these are reprehensible people that have done these injustices to my people, I have to live by my Holy Quran, which says I must live with the Christians and the Jews. So please bear that in mind when you make statements about Muslims coming here. And one final remark concerning the Eastern European countries. You've received a great deal of help, and rightly so, from the developed parts of Europe to bring your economies and wealth up to the rest of Europe. You've allowed your people to go and migrate to the Western Europe to do well, and we welcome that. But in regards to those poor people fleeing from Syria, you must have heart and welcome them in to your countries as well, because they seek refuge. Thank you.
It'd be good if the Muslim countries let them in as well.
There's 2 million in there. There's over 1 million in Lebanon. There's over 1 million.
Thank you very much. Very briefly, a comment to the question of Joseph Bodansky. When I was founder of a university in Skopje in 2006, I experienced the extension of the Salafi founding in Skopje, for example, or in Macedonia. The same thing is happening in the Balkan area. For example, now we are experiencing a crisis, a certain crisis because of the Russian-Turkish crisis in the tourism sector. I called 3 days ago a businessman busy in this sector. He said, I want to invest in Sarajevo. I said, why? Because in Sarajevo, all the Gulf states are flying every day frequently than the Turkish airlines. And then I can earn money there. It means the existence of the Salafi movement is more powerful now in these Balkan areas than the other nations. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you. You're confirming what I was saying in my own experience of that region. I think I would allow this gentleman at the back. Well, make it very quick, I'm afraid, because we're really around. The gentleman there, and then this last gentleman there, and then I have to close the questions from the floor. Can you say who you are? I believe you're a former Turkish member of parliament. You should identify yourself first so we know where you're coming from. Please say who you are first.
Thank you very much, sir. My name is Mohsen. I'm a researcher in Catholic University of Leuven, and I'm also a journalist. The issue was brought up by the gentleman over there about the mosque and religious foundation supported by Saudis in Balkan and in Albania and various places. But I'm afraid the problem is much closer to us. In the small city of Leuven, there are few mosques. Some of them supported by Saudi government and some of them supported by Iranian government. We neglected the extremism, and now we're facing the problem. But soon we're going to have a problem of sectarian war within the heart of Europe. So if we are not going to have any framework to solve this problem as soon as possible, I'm afraid soon we're going to have, right in the middle of the Brussels, a sectarian war between the mosques supported by Iranian government and the mosques supported by Saudis. These proxies should be cut off, not only in Syria, but should be extended to right in Brussels. Thank you very much.
Well, very depressing thought, that, to put it mildly. I think we had one final question for that gentleman there. Could you,
yeah, I just want to go back to Mr. Bashir.
Okay, I'll allow a lady, a lot of gentlemen. I will give the lady the floor after you, sir. Sorry. Let's get some. Sorry, the gentleman. Sorry, I interrupted you. Please carry on. Then the lady.
Sorry. Okay. Yeah, I just want to ask Mr. Bashir. It's all very well you lecturing the Europeans to take on these Muslim refugees, but the fact is that very few Islamic countries have taken the Syrian refugees, and the ones that have taken, they live in appalling conditions with not equal rights as citizens. So wouldn't it be better if you lecture your Muslim brothers and fellows first before the Europeans?
First of all, they're not Muslim refugees, they're refugees. Refugees don't have a religion. They can belong to any faith. Right, there are a lot of Christian refugees amongst them as well, Yazidis, etc. Yes, you're right. Everybody. Yes, you're right. Everybody should give them.
So why doesn't Kuwait take any? Why doesn't Bahrain take any? Why doesn't Oman take any?
Well, 2 million live in Turkey, which is a Muslim country. 1 million live in Lebanon. 1 million in Jordan. Lots of money has been supplied.
Okay, I think I'll stop this because it's not really supposed to be a debate amongst the questioners. But there is a serious issue why GCC countries aren't taking any refugees at all, basically. That is a big issue, and I would entirely agree with you, sir. The lady there, please.
How can I use this one? Yeah. My name is Yasmin Allawi. I'm British originally from Iraq. I want to say something and ask. ISIS used the name of Islam to rule and expand and conquer and kill. We are from Iraq, a country with a government, with the army. We are Muslim country majority. We fight ISIS, but we don't have the weapon that they have it. They have the latest weapon that they can fight the whole country, even like in Syria. Syria is a Muslim country. So ISIS, maybe they are using the name of Islam, but they are not a real Muslim. They are killing even Muslims themselves. And this is my question, is the weapon. They are getting the help. They're getting the resources. They're getting the latest weapon that even as a government, it's very hard to fight them. Thank you.
Well, again, that's more of a statement, but of course, where ISIS gets its money and arms is a very big question. A lot of it comes actually from Iraqi armed forces abandoning their American-supplied weapons in large amounts, and that is another issue itself. I think we'll stop the questions there, and I'll open it to the panel. There's a lot of questions. I'm not sure whether we can address all of them in the time allotted, but who would like to answer some or all of the questions? Who can we start with? Anybody down this end would like to answer any of those questions from the floor? Two, sorry. Is that directed at the gentleman over there? Sorry, that was directed specifically at you, I gather.
Oh, about the terrorist finance, correct, sir? About the financing from the U.S. and Europe for ISIS? Is that correct? Yes, specifically, the sources for financing from ISIS are not only coming from the geographical defined area of conflict, but also from various funds of sourcing. Al-Qaeda did the same thing. And of course, the answer to the question is, in a perfect world, should we find the financing and cut it off? Absolutely. But in the reality of the world, there will be financing that leaks through, which brings me to an interesting point that I'll segue that I find it surprising and it hasn't really been mentioned today. And that is the use of the internet. Before, when you had asymmetrical warfare, you had a national actor and you had a subnational actor. And the national actor could use its national resources to target the bad guys or the subnational actor, and that was where that conflict, the basic central activity was. Because of the problem today, and it's interesting we sit here because we are the ones who are going to have to address this, the internet has gone beyond borders. All right. As I look around, I see a lot of young people in here. Unfortunately, I'm not Peter Pan. I'm a little bit older. But the young people in here can attest to the fact that the internet can be used for not only finances, but the internet is the now targeting youth. It is the recruitment weapon. And one thing different about ISIS than Al-Qaeda, Al-Qaeda dabbled on the internet. ISIS has made it a media show. That's the horrific incidents, the crimes against women, and they're targeting they throw it out there on the internet, not only for financial reasons, but also to attract those who may be attracted in some form or fashion to that media, that spotlight. So I find it, the finance, the reason I'm talking about the finance, but segued in the internet is because that is a whole different area. Because we know, as we sit here, that opens up a whole different can of worms. Because the internet, we talk about values, we talk about civil liberties. Now what do? Because now the internet and cyber is crossing borders, transnational issues, which ultimately is going to force all of us to go back to a similar topic that has been echoed today. And that is, we all have to decide what the threshold for action for criminal activity prevention, disruption, and identification balanced with those of civil liberties.
Okay, I still think there is a big issue about why ISIS were able to sell their oil so successfully for so long, and it took a very long time before the alliance started bombing the refineries and the oil wells and really started to cut off their funding. Before that, they were raising $2 million a day by selling their oil to unknown buyers. Anybody down here in the panel wish to address any of the questions? Christina.
Yes, well, I think that there were some remarks not mentioned my name, but probably you mean the questions to me. Yes, refugees, these are people who need really help, and Europe always is helping real refugees, has helped and should help in the future. But what we are facing now, these are millions of people who are not refugees at all, at least most of them. And this creates fears, this brings crimes, and I think that exactly we should speak about it openly. If we don't do it today, then tomorrow it will be even worse, because every force will have a contra-force. And you probably have heard that in Finland and in Estonia, already on the civil society level, was created the Odin soldiers companies, which means that this is just a civil movement to defend their own countries and their own people in these countries. We don't know where it brings and what kind of conflict is in the air. In Estonia, this organization was founded 1 month ago, and in 1 month we have registered 8,000 men and women, including Russians, into that organization with purpose to defend women and young girls. Estonian army has 4,000 people only, official defense forces, while in 1 month's time, 8,000 volunteers. That means that there is a problem in here.
Okay, thank you. I just want to clarify, I think, a point that Mr. Amjad Bashir referred to regards the Tatar minority. I was the one who said there is a danger, and this followed a conversation I had with one of the leadership from the Majlis, that the occupation of the Crimea may make some of the hotheads turn it into a jihadi issue, i.e. a jihadist cause against the Russian invasion. I didn't say that the Tatars were jihadists. On the contrary, they've been extremely secular and moderate for centuries. There is a danger now, by expelling their leadership, by persecuting them and so on, there is a danger of making this a much more ethno-religious conflict than it was beforehand. And I just want to leave one final thought, particularly based on what Mr. Heinrich was saying. You didn't say which party you were from. I don't know which party you are in the Bundestag.
Christian Democrats.
Christian Democrat. I'm very sympathetic, of course, to Chancellor Merkel wishing to maintain her values, our common values of democracy, tolerance and human rights. But is it sustainable to have an open door policy without limit to even genuine refugees coming from the conflict zones of the world, particularly to Germany? Austria has said genug, we can't have any more, the numbers are too great. And I would also, another thing to do with the rule of law, can we really have the 1951 Geneva Convention on Refugees, which basically was designed for a post-Second World War period? Is it still fit for purpose now in 2016, where people can cross dozens of countries which are safe, with which they have cultural, linguistic and religious connections, seeking the richest countries in the world with the most generous social security systems, and claim asylum, or claim asylum in countries like Turkey, be settled in a camp, and then decide after 2 years they wish to claim asylum again in another country and reapply. These are very serious moral, ethical and legal political questions which I think we'll have to address sooner or later.
Yeah.
So thank you very much, everybody. Now, this is the end of this panel, and we'll have a short break before the next panel commencing in a few minutes' time. Thank you very much for your attention.
I think we should get underway soon. Okay. Is that all right? Sound level's okay? Good. Okay, we're going to get underway in just a very few seconds. A few people are drifting back in. My name is James Cladd. I was in the administration of George W. Bush. I have to say very quickly, not doing Middle East affairs, but Asia as well, but have been circling many issues relating to this for many years. And have seen extremism in many guises in many places and will be speaking. My chairman here has put me at the very end of the program to speak very briefly about some thoughts that may be useful to you. But what I want to do is take far less advantage of the chair and the prerogatives of the chair and simply get straight into the presentations by the panelists, beginning on this side. We've got, who's there? Yusuf's there, Mark Hambley's there, Anna Pryor. We have Shaminder Talwar, and is that it? I think that's pretty much it. And Dr. Yusuf. Yes, and Dr. Yusuf, of course. So I think really the simplest thing to do, we're talking about tackling extremism at the root, a very, very complex and really sort of difficult idea, and really, if you look at history, seemingly bound to defeat any efforts that we make. But I think collectively here on the panel, we have a great range of experience and insight. And I wonder if I could begin with Mark and then simply come along the panel, and I'll keep my own comments to a minimum and then wrap up some things at the end. And also, I think it'd be useful for you, not me, to give a little bit about your own background, which you think is germane to your discussion. And you, of course, represented the U.S. in both Qatar and Lebanon and have seen a lot of extremist tendencies close up and personally.
Well, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I have had 27 years in the Middle East, dealing quite often with the rise of Islamic extremism, starting in Egypt and through Saudi Arabia, on into Iraq and Libya and other places. But I'd like to thank first to thank the ECR group for having us this morning in this very prestigious setting. In the United States, our perception of political extremism often involves what John Gardner describes as two prime ingredients. First, an excessive simple diagnosis of the world's ills, and secondly, a conviction that there are definable villains behind it all. And I think that's certainly the case that the United States is confronted with at the moment. What we're talking about this morning is about the roots of violent Islamic extremism, how to tackle them, how to deal with it. I think we go back to the roots of violent extremism, really talking about Sunni extremism here, not the Shia extremism, just for clarification. But Islamic extremism really began 90 years ago with the establishment of the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt, pro-nationalist originally against the British, and later then moved on into a far more violent, radical-oriented group in Egypt and Syria, and later in Palestine with Hamas, which is simply a branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. Even earlier, we'd had the Salafist movement reemerge in Arabia in conjunction with Abdulaziz al-Saud's reconquest of much of the Arabian Peninsula, hand in hand with the Wahhabi clerics who imposed a virulently austere form of Islam on its subjects. And this is, of course, the third time that this sort of joint state religious movement had taken over in Arabia. But even over time, Al-Qaeda took root out of these same Salafist teachings. And later offshoots like ISIS have branched into the more virulent form of Islam, which preaches Armageddon, for example. ISIS is very different from Al-Qaeda in that view. They view that Armageddon is near and calls upon all the faithful to come join the caliphate in fighting what they see as an inevitable conflict, final conflict between apostates and the true Islam, which they claim they represent. Now, the appeal of ISIS ideology is extraordinary. I think Marty Martin made reference to this in the last panel, and this is very, very true. This is extraordinary, the way this ideology is spread around the world. A few ideas emanate from Raqqa or from Mosul by Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, the so-called caliph. These then are promulgated on the internet, and then several thousand iterations are taken, but these are then are really professionalized in a way which is absolutely extraordinary. This publication, Dabiq, which refers to a place where Armageddon is supposed to take place in Syria. It was the place where one of the American journalists was first beheaded, to emphasize the importance of this particular geographic setting. But Dabiq is a very, very fancy publication which publishes monthly issues on the most outrageous topics. A recent one was on validating the importance of slavery and how this can be quite acceptable. Talked about how Michelle Obama will be made a slave, be sold for 1/4 of a golden dinar. It's an absolutely outrageous publication, but it's something which appeals to a wide range of Muslims, converted Muslims, also Muslims in many parts of the world, in Europe, in Asia, and even in the Americas. Now, in order to counter this type of belief, really we work at 3 different levels in the U.S. We're trying to build awareness. We need to understand the drivers and indicators of radicalization and how people are recruited to violence. And secondly, we have to consider the extremist narrative. We have to encourage civil society led narratives both online and in our communities, try to combat this. And frankly, the importance of the third aspect is we have to emphasize community-led initiatives. We have to empower community efforts to disrupt the radicalization of our youth in a process before individuals start to commit criminal activity. And this has to take place in schools, in after-school activities, in houses of worship, in community centers, a broad range of outlets. And we formed, in the U.S., we have 3 particular grassroots programs. We're starting one in Los Angeles, another in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and St. Paul, the Twin Cities, which focuses actually on the Somali community, because many young Shihabists are going back from their immigration to the U.S. back to Somalia and joining the Shahab movement there. And also in Greater Boston, this movement is also taking form. But this is a problem which, the roots are so complicated. We have to find ways in which we can address them in a multifaceted manner. It's going to take a lot of time, a lot of effort. I think the United Kingdom has done a bit better job than we have in the U.S. We're playing a bit of catch-up here, but nonetheless, I think it's certainly an international effort which I hope will bear some positive fruit in the coming years. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. I wonder if we could now hear from Dr. Yusuf Ziya Irbit from Turkey, an old friend.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I would like to thank, first of all, to the IMAN Foundation and to the European Conservatives and Reformists Group for organizing such a conference. First of all, the Middle East and North Africa, including the neighboring countries of Turkey, have entered a new area of transformation. This transformation has raised new expectations regarding the future of the region. We have to keep our long-term perspective and recognize once again the irreversibility of the historic transformation that stems from the regional dynamics. Because of the Syrian crisis, refugee crisis became a tool of politics. For example, the Russian Federation is using the refugees in order to squeeze at the implemented policies of the European Union. We have a common responsibility to reverse the tide of extremism, sectarianism, violence, and terrorism. The avoidance of further disputes in the region require more attention and involvement. This is only possible to manage the disputes and to restore the peace and confidence by higher intelligence. Only in Syria, why by higher intelligence? Only in Syria there are more than 100 groups fighting with each other. You cannot go to one group and say, okay, you can restore now a peace in Syria or in the region. This is almost impossible. It is impossible to avoid the emergence of the structures such as IS without establishing a powerful control mechanism. We see that the borders and mechanisms established almost a century ago could not continue to solve the new dimension of the problems emerged nowadays. A new approach is needed. Finally, the need for the energy security of the world cannot be ignored by analyzing the political developments in the region. A powerful mechanism commanding the advanced technological achievements must be in a position to contribute for controlling the distribution of the energy resources. Otherwise, we cannot avoid the emergence of the new regional and worldwide disputes. We have to see all of the praying places equally sacred and respectful, be it a mosque, a church, a synagogue, and combat in an efficient way the radical and extremist groups in order to establish a peaceful cooperation among the religions and societies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yusuf. You and Mark, speaking to experience, insights forged in long experience in the region, have really started this panel off very well. Dr. Bonansky, I invite you to carry on in the same vein.
Okay. Thanks once again. Comments from a cynic, gray-haired practitioner. Look, all of us in this room, all over the world, we have our manifest destinies, communal manifest destinies. We also have what we believe to be legitimate grievances against the world around, against society, against regions, against a whole of other things. And if you go, once you leave Europe and you go into developing world, and I'm using it really wide definition, the manifest destinies become more and more concrete, and the grievances more and more bitter. Now, people reached a point, primarily because of the mass communications, and I don't think that the internet is number one issue. The cell phone is by far the number one issue, because we all yap and yak all over the place. That desire to do something about both manifest destinies and grievances have become explosive. The solutions, where people are looking for solutions these days for their problems, i.e. for realizing both solving the problems, is either in sub-state entities, i.e. the minorities, the tribes, the extended families, and so on and so forth, or in messianic universal extremist ideologies, something that will be bigger than the state, bigger than society where they live in, that will have some kind of divine license to go trash whoever oppresses you. Here, the caliphate is bringing in two new things that we didn't have before. First is something that has not been mentioned in Western press, media, even though it's the most important thing about the caliphate, is the Khorasan Pledge. This is a document written by 8 scholars, luminaries of Islam, real good scholars, that advocate purity, no corruption, return to core values in the positive way. All of the luminaries of Islam, all of the dignitaries, etc., I'm not talking about the Bayad taking allegiance to al-Baghdadi in order to kill in his name, but the entities who really join have to sign the Khorasan Pledge. And that gives the system an aura of, we are going to solve problems that nobody else dared to tackle. The second thing, which is more in the popular grassroots level, is the issue, if we look at Islam in a simplistic way, and oversimplified way even. There was the Prophet. After the Prophet, there were the 4 pious caliphs. The first 2 of them, Abu Bakr and Omar, are supposed to be the peak of human endeavor, because they learned to govern from the Prophet. They were not divine as the Prophet was, but they really followed his teaching. And after that, it was kind of downtrend. What Baghdadi is doing is saying we can try and strive to get back to the days of Omar and Abu Bakr. And if you look at the propaganda coming out of the caliphate, while in English we just see the guys cutting the head and so on and so forth, in Arabic there's an explanation. He broke the law in the days of the pious caliphs. That was the punishment. The precedent was set, we're following. And in the illiterate society that exists today in the developing world, good enough, unfortunately. Now, the real challenge that we're facing, and I'm trying to run, is the delegitimization of the state. There's no viable state in the developing world for all intents and purposes. All the borders have been set by the colonial authorities. All the borders have been set in such a way as to break the historic foci of power and gravitas of the population. Therefore, in the aftermath of the Cold War, and during the Cold War, we just insisted during the decolonialization era, you're with us or against us, both sides did it. We have, each of us have our own favorite dictators, everybody was happy. Now, and no more, there's no state, there's no legitimate vehicle through which to address the issues of the grievances and aspirations. The West, the civilized world, insists on the state because we have the United Nations and all of the international treaties, blah, blah, blah. We state, but we have billions and billions of people who are frustrated as hell of a variety of issues, and they don't have any avenue through which to express the grievances and try to solve the problems. So, where do they go? They go to where they can find divine license to kill in order to further their positions. It is not as much with despair as it is yearning, solve the problems once and for good. Decolonialization was just the beginning of a process of eradicating Western pressure and realizing one's own destiny. And that will continue. So, issue number one for the West. Oh, and the whole issue is further aggravated by the confusion created by the hasty, unorganized urbanization that we see in the developing world. Because urbanization is breaking the tribal, extended family, all of the traditional structure of society that withheld society for centuries and millennia, boom, without giving anything, any substitute. It's breaking, and we're throwing out the frustrated guy into the middle of nowhere, and we expect him to say, oh, thank you, you're so nice to us. That will not work. But in order to solve it, we must comprehend the grassroots. There is no one, solutions are no one size fits all. Solution is not something the UN said, some nice white guy said in Geneva, wrote a convention about this and that, so okay, so this must apply to everybody, everywhere, all shape, colors, shades, and what have you. No, it's not going to work. We must comprehend the grassroots, we must comprehend the transformation of the developing world, and then find solution, working solution at that level. If we don't do so, they will embrace the mandate from heaven as they see it, i.e. the jihadist mandate, and will go and start killing and bringing the frustration, the aspiration, the hostility to us, to the heart of the West, just to say thank you for preventing them from realizing their own manifest destinies as they want it to be. So the choice is ours. Either we just go and solve it at core values, or face the music. I'm afraid we'll face the music, knowing the political system in the West.
You can see why Dr. Bodansky is a force within the American Congress and is quite influential. I'm very pleased that he brought up this question of what you could call the failure of the post-colonial state, the failure of the Westphalian idea of a territorially bordered, coextensive sovereign state. It's very big and it's almost always overlooked in these issues. We have two remaining panelists to speak to us today, Anna Pryor and Professor Talwar, both from the Unity of Faith Foundation. I wonder if both of you could speak a little bit about your foundation as you deliver your remarks.
Actions speak louder than words. I mean, that's what's required for grassroots tackling this problem. The Unity of Faith Foundation is a secular European charitable organization that helps connect cultures, communities, religions together through festivals or seminars or conferences. And we've been doing this since 2011 of connecting people from different parts of the world through these wonderful festivals. But 18 months back, it took a turn where 10 children from London contacted our foundation and said that we're playing football in concrete cages and we're not allowed to play on the AstroTurf or the 4G pitches that are designed or put into our estates, and it's about look but don't touch. So we approached these children, spoke to these children, and asked them what they did require. They just wanted to play football from all different backgrounds, from all different cultures. And what developed, where 10 children developed into hundreds of children within the space of 18 months from all over London, coming down and playing football together. Across all barriers, across all cultures, breaking all barriers. What was so special about this project was we were helping children from underprivileged backgrounds. We were helping children who are basically exposed to gangs, who are on the throes of going into gangs. But 9 months back, what really shook us was one of the female members of our football team approached us with a concern, and on the football field showed us a phone. And on that phone was a Snapchat. Not Facebook, not WhatsApp, Snapchat. And on that Snapchat was a message to her, directly to her, to basically be part of, or getting her lured in, or getting her sucked in to ISIS. We realized that we have a situation here. And with that situation, thinking about that situation in hand, that's how the football project became a project to tackle extremism or radicalization. We suddenly realized that we have to instill European values into the football program. And how we did this was through tactical or tournament, when we're discussing it with the children, bringing those values into those discussions with the children. And what happened immediately was the child or the children got lured in and started realizing that, do you know what, this could be the right way going forward. Now, coming back to this child who was exposed to all these internet or social media, but Snapchat, she didn't want to approach her parents, she didn't want to approach the imam from the mosque, and she didn't want to approach her school. But the reason that she kept the trust and the reason that she kept that bond with us is because we put our hand out from the beginning and supported this child through football. When she approached us, we took it upon ourselves. Now, there's no rule book. There's no manual here that how do we tackle or how do we help these children. There's nothing around. We had to basically work things out organically ourselves to help these children. And as we were helping that child, because she was the captain of the girls' football team, many other girls came forward and said, Doc, could you help us out? We've got this on our hands. This is first-hand, ladies and gentlemen, first-hand what you see. You read about it in the books, you read about it in the newspapers. We saw it physically in front of our hands, on the phone. The girl basically was confused. She was confused. She's British born, Somali background, but confused about what do I do. Now, we had to work something out, and what we worked out was she was a die-hard Chelsea Football Club fan. Die-hard. And then we came to a crossroads where I said to her very clearly, on the left-hand side, you've got the gates of Heathrow Airport that will take you to Turkey, that will take you to Syria. On the right-hand side, you've got the gates of Stamford Bridge with Jose Mourinho holding his hand out. What do you want? Within 10 seconds, that girl said, Doc, I want Mourinho. The next day, we took that girl with her parents to Stamford Bridge. And as she entered Stamford Bridge, the first thing she did was kneel down and kiss the ground of Stamford Bridge. I turned round and the parents were in tears. Now, not only have you helped or supported that child, not only have you supported that family, the whole community, but ultimately Britain, ultimately Europe, ultimately the world, because it'll be a domino effect of helping those children. Till date, we've helped 33 children who are exposed to radicalization and turned them round. through football. Could be sport, could be any sport, but turn them round. Now, just to see the effects, like I said, actions speak louder than words. There's a short news coverage from an international channel that covered us. If we can have the video, please. Everyone can look at the screens.
On this West London field,
1, 2,
football fights fundamentalism.
I made a lot of friends like in different cultures. I used to just spend time with my friends, like only like my cultural friends, like Islamic, Muslim.
This is a team that uses sport to bring everyone together.
It's taught me about this, the unity of faiths, and no matter what religion you are, you'd always be British.
It's important that you guys understand each other.
This project was founded by Shamenda Talwa.
Football brings them together, and then what we do is try to instill British values within them. We're not taking away their culture. Their culture could be Somali or Afghanistani or Pakistani, but what we do say is, but your identity is British.
And this is the team's real opponent, stopping young Londoners joining the so-called Islamic State.
We've stopped hundreds of kids being radicalised, and it's a domino effect. You help one child or you help 10 children, those 10 children will speak to their other friends, and that multiplies, and we can help hundreds more.
And that's why the charity was a guest at Westminster today. The project so successful it could be extended all over the country. Among its supporters, the new Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. Can football really stop radicalisation?
Football on its own can help, as indeed any other community activity can help. It's the responsibility of all of us to reach out to everybody, particularly young people.
It's not we need to keep them together.
Keep it together.
The charity's work has even been praised by President Obama, who's invited the children to the White House. For this Southall team, football is more than just a game. Rags Martel, ITV News.
Ladies and gentlemen, that was just a small element of the work that sport has an incredible way of breaking barriers. Be it President Obama who's supporting us, or Saeed Kamal who's bringing our children to the European Parliament to share this message. So all of you have this opportunity, being your heads of, or your representatives of your country, to basically join and show action and harness the children in your country, and put an arm around them like this. Put an arm around them and tell them it's proud to be European. This is your community and we are your family. Because, ladies and gentlemen, actions speak louder than words. And the children are our future. And this is what the children require. Thank you. I'll pass it to my colleague Anna just to summarize.
Well, there's not an awful lot left to say, but in England we have 300 languages, and in the UK, and in one borough alone we have 160 in Lambeth, 142 in West London. How do we address that? Football is an obvious way of having communication from different cultures, different religions, different backgrounds, and that is, it's proving to be an enormously successful initiative. And I think that it's time to know and accept that we're all responsible for the current state of the world, and we have to, in any way we can, create a better world, a better place. And for the well-off, it's intelligent and wise to contribute what you can, even if only for the sake of your children and grandchildren. Who knows if we can transform the financial machinery of war to the financial machinery of sport and achieve greater potential of each individual on the planet, for they have so much to give. It's a positive way forward. It's time for that change. If we change the way we look at things, the things we look at change. And I'll end with, there is no colour of the skin, there is no colour of religion, there is no colour of the flag, there is only the colour of the heart. Only the colour of the heart can change our world to a better place. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Well said, Anna Pryor. Lest you think that the appeal to football goes over my head, living on the other side of the Atlantic. Thanks to Rebal and other friends in London, my 20-year-old son was the first American office apprentice at West Ham United last summer. So I'm absolutely full of football all the time, and he's taken me away from the most boring game in the world, which is American baseball, but don't repeat that. Look, we want to stay on schedule. There's no point to burden you with a lot of new ideas. What I want to do, if I can, in closing, is speak a little bit about some of the perspectives. And I was super pleased with the way some of this came out in the process of this panel. Dr. Bodansky, in particular, talking about things which are inherent in the current nature of contemporary reality. Especially in the West and especially in the United States, there's a temptation to see something as absolutely brand new. I mean, it was absolutely predictable that any maniac with a long bolo knife who was going to decapitate someone on a video screen would seize the American people's attention, to the extent that within 5 days, serious national polling showed Americans thinking that this group was an existential threat, that it was more serious and more threatening than China, which is what I've really worked on a lot in Asia. And for all kinds of traditional, classic, international, government-to-government reasons, China is a very big issue. But you try to talk about that today. Marginalization of peoples have been occurring and a resort to violence for the dispossessed and the underpowered. It's been going on for a long time. My own career, I saw the Tamil Tigers, Somalis, chauvinistic monks in Sri Lanka. It's not the label, it's not the religious affiliation. We need to say this all the time. And that recourse to violence and terrorism and this type of extremism is aided and buttressed by the past. In the Middle East, there's the recurrent ulcer of colonization in Palestine. But in other places where I've worked, in Islamic countries, Indonesia, Turkey, Central Asia, India, there's problems like Darul Islam. Who remembers that in West Java? And yet the generations of kids and grandkids remember the humiliation suffered. So it can be summoned into being again. Specific grudges are subsumed into the broader zeitgeist. Way back in the 1980s as a young foreign correspondent, I was in Mindanao and I was bumping into really disturbing Wahhabi missionaries from these waqfs, isn't that the right word, these foundations. And they were spewing the most virulent things. And again, the idea was, well, it doesn't matter, they're all crazy and we're happy to have the money and all the rest of it in that kind of compliant Southeast Asian way. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. So the next point I want to make is, what is this government response meant to be? Remember, governments are always meant to do something. Something's happening, do something. And, we were in this absurd situation right after 9/11 where everyone ran around doing something. There was the police work, which was unfortunately pushed aside by the militarization of the use of a tactic. And the declaration of war, I mean, it's absurd if you think about it. A declaration of war on a tactic, terrorism, the global war on terror, so that any country which felt that it was dealing with violent extremism, the Sri Lankans, Latin American countries, would come to us and get extra money because that was the script. But it became worse. It became, why don't they like us? And strange films and strange satellites, you remember this, were created with the message apparently being, come to America, you'll have 2 cars in your garage and everyone will like you, and if you wear a sort of rather minimal head, burqa or some type of head covering, that's all right, everyone will get by. What did that do? Or aid programs that were suddenly dramatically increased on the premise, which was false, that impoverishment led directly to terrorism. Madness also. So this whole question of doing things in a way that, oriented toward the youth and thinking that the youth would get the message about multiculturalism, tolerance, at the same time they were boogieing to the latest pop song. Very bizarre. And then, of course, State Department kicked in, and what did we do? We proscribed certain groups. It's a big game in Washington. The Chinese loved it when we prescribed the East Turkestan group. I hope you weren't in favor of that at that time. And I mean, it's a complete gift to them, to the Chinese, the Han Chinese chauvinism, which is completely eliminating Uyghur influence over time in Xinjiang. And yet, we get into this game. Some things we do very effectively, and it happens to be, as usual, the things we don't talk about very much, which is OFAC, Office of Foreign Asset Control, and Treasury, and really squeezing countries that are playing games with the financing side. And I was part of some of that for other issues, had nothing to do with violent extremism, but it was wonderful to see it work. wonderful to see it work, and wonderful that no one talked about it, which is our problem. Because what we do have is a tendency to talk too much. Maybe, you see it in Europe. I come over here, see a lot of similarities and dissimilarities. But there's this asymmetrical mismatch which plays to violent extremist, and I may say adolescent fantasies of an asymmetrical contest. And we had the absurdity of George Bush coming out at 7 in the morning calling a special conference and saying we've killed al-Zarqawi. And I was with a group of Arab generals and they said, why is he giving equivalence to this sadistic, crazy person? And why is he acting as if this defines his political day? We dumb ourselves down all the time. And yet there are things in this mix of emotions that can help. Shame. There were some very interesting bits of work that were done with the families of young jihadis who tortured and killed people. And they would bring the mothers of those who'd been killed, screaming at these young boys. And suddenly the fantasy of someone on a white charger with a green banner disappeared, and they dissolved into pimply-faced, blubbering people and lost huge face to the Arab world when they did that. So look, finally, the point to do is to come back and to sort of get a grip. What's happened today that's different from 9/11 and all the rest of it, is that it's entwined with mass migration. It's become set in the mind that slipping in, and by the way, it's economic migration almost entirely. It's true everywhere. The Trump factor rests on very similar issues that you're finding in Europe as well. Islamic motivated killers are not an existential threat. Anyway, existential threat remains with big, powerful states that have nuclear weapons. So, get a grip. But the problem is it's happening at a time of post-colonial state failure, the ability to create a kind of parallel, fictive proto-state by using all of the goddamn, whatever the social media and all the rest of it. I banned my son from bringing it to the table. I think that the other issue, too, is this idea of a transcendent pledge of purity. In other words, it's not just about killing people. It's about regaining something that was pure and better. And so the last thought is, every political system is susceptible to the tremendous appeal of the following phrase: we were great once and will be again. And I swear to God, every country I've gone to, it's the same thing. The Thais, yeah, we were great. We'll be great again once. We'll be greater Thailand. Brunei, and dinky little Brunei and Borneo, we were great once. We'll be great again. So it is in nationalism and state identity, so it also is in cultural tradition. I think this has been a really terrific occasion. I've learned a great deal from you and from all of you successively. I want to thank the people who made this possible. I want to thank the ECR group. I want to thank Rebo in particular for sticking with us all along. It's a great group in the foundation. It's doing very interesting and different work. I encourage you to take an interest in it. And I would like to invite you, if you want, we've just gone past 12:30, to ask any questions. But before you do that, if you're so minded, please extend your appreciation to my colleagues in the usual way. Well, Rabbi, did I speak the truth?
Thank you. As you know, I'm a fully paid up member of your fan club. Since you mentioned me, you've opened the door, and I'm going to rush in. When we speak about extremism, I know that the title is Perspectives on the Fight Against Islamist Extremism, but I don't think Islamist extremism exists in a vacuum. I think that all extremisms feed on each other and have an effect on each other. And I think that in Europe, there is the rise of right-wing extremism, extreme right extremism. And I think that phenomenon has a very strong counter effect on Islamic extremism as well. To a certain extent, it's paid for and supported and encouraged by the Kremlin. But sadly, Europe didn't invent right-wing extremism when the Muslim community came to Europe. It was here long, long before. And we know how dangerous that extremism is. over 100 members of my family were killed by that extremism. And my father was one of the soldiers who liberated Bergen-Belsen and helped the survivors get their lives together. So that extremism, we know what it is, we know how dangerous it is, and I would like to ask the panel for some ideas how to deal with it. And especially now that, sadly, this extremism is expressing itself in the United States, where a lot of people feel lost, they feel a lack of hope, and therefore they feel that the future requires extremism in order for them to have a voice and for them to have a future. And I think that we really need to think very hard and deeply how to deal with this issue.
In the interest of time, let's get some short responses from my colleagues here. Yeah, Reba, go ahead first if you like. Right.
Look, there is a difference between contemporary extremism, right-wing whatever, and between the jihadist world. The jihadist world, both Bin Laden, the program that was developed under Bin Laden in 2005, and its readaptation under Baghdadi last year, 2015, called for we will own the world, we will conquer the world. Now, is that the wish of the teaching, the true teaching of Islam? No, it is not. Is that the aspiration of the vast majority of Muslims in the world? No, it is not. But this is an aspiration that gives license to blow up, to go into martyrdom, blow up people, kill people indiscriminately, both throughout the developing world and at the heart of the West. And yes, Muslims are probably constitute 80, give or take, % of the victims of jihadism. So.
Yes, thank you very much, Rabbi Herschel, for your question. I think that during this conference we've talked a lot about, what we could do to counter and challenge extremism, and of course there are endless ways to challenge them in the amazing programs that the Unity of Faith is doing, and many other, of course, organizations are. But there is one main thing we could, as you've seen a few months ago, with the Prime Minister Cameron, who came out and introduced new laws, about closing down all places that promote and incite hatred and violence, about closing down those websites that incite hatred and violence, satellite TVs, forbidding those kind of people to working with children. These are all great laws that we could introduce in the EU and in the West. But if we don't go out of the perverted ideology, if we don't go after the underlying ideology, if we don't go after those countries that use social media, that we have, everyone is linked today it's very easy to be linked through Facebook, through Twitter, through many other new, applications that have come out, or through, we have mobile phones, we have satellite TV. So you could close down a TV that's based in London or in France or here. Tomorrow you'll have another 100 funded TV stations, that mushrooms from African Muslim countries or from Saudi itself. I will tell you a very astonishing story that I've had myself. I once called a Saudi official and complained about one of the TV stations that was based in Saudi, and he's from the royal family, and he was, he had a very important position. And I told him, you have to close down this TV channel. This is inciting hatred and violence against other Muslims. And if this continues like that, it's going to create, a broader regional sectarian war. And his response, was very astonishing. This is a Western-educated prince. And he told me, Ribal, you have been working for democracy and freedom for all these years. Now that we allow people to speak, you want us to shut them, to shut them down. So I was really, that's the kind of mentality that we have in this area. Is I didn't tell him, but I want to tell him. Then why don't you allow us to open a TV channel in Saudi Arabia that criticizes, people, your government from forbidding women to drive, or from cutting people's heads as ISIS do, or amputation, and so on and so on. So if we don't have the courage to go after those countries and tell them, tell them that we will bring to justice any of those clerics that incite hatred and violence from your country, like Sheikh Youssef al-Qaradawi, who's sitting in Qatar, and who has called a year and a half ago on all Sunni Muslims to carry arms and kill all Shias and Alawites. This is the kind of rhetoric that we certainly don't need, and we certainly need to go after those, those people. And he was welcomed by the Grand Mufti of Saudi Arabia, this is who has also called previously on fellow Muslims to burn down churches in the region. And we haven't heard, unfortunately, in the West. I mean, we have been very hypocritical. We haven't heard any politicians come out and criticize Saudi for something like that, even though this is the highest religious authority. I've been, I've been to many conferences. I've spoken to many people, but we always go after the small things, the small issues. But we forget that we are spending little monies for those kind of projects. Yeah, I'm sure you yourself, with your project, you need a lot of money to support those kind of things. Because on the other hand, you're having those countries who are spending billions and hundreds of billions of dollars, to promote mosques. Yeah, yes, exactly, to promote mosques, to promote this perverted ideology, from Pakistan's madrasas to Afghanistan to Indonesia to Malaysia. It's very unlucky that we don't have former ambassador Dennis Ignatius, who was a Malaysian ambassador, and who he's Christian, and he often speaks against Islamism, and who told me that he does not recognize the Malaysia where he was born. He does not recognize the Malaysia where he grew up. It's that this ideology has been spreading, everywhere, and there is no fund to counter that ideology. There's no fund to support those groups, those grassroots groups who want to counter this ideology with education, infrastructure, investment, and so on. Thank you very much.
Forgive me. I'm going to take there's two people waiting to ask from the floor, and then we'll ask people to respond to any questions that are still out there. Anna, you mark all this. Okay, so the first one's you, sir, and then you.
My question is about failed states. There's no doubt that when states fail and there's a vacuum, that's when terrorists take hold. If you look at Libya, if you look at Somalia, if you look at Iraq, these were all, Afghanistan, these were all failed states. I think whether we like it or not, we have to support nations, and nations can then develop a sense of belonging to the population. I think you very rightly mentioned earlier about hasty urbanization, where people come from all different parts of a nation to urban areas, bringing their differences. But it's the state, if the army and the police are strong, if the law and justice system is strong, it can bring about an environment where people feel safe and feel part of that society. Isn't it fundamentally, geopolitically, the failure of these states which allows radicals to step in and fill that vacuum? And isn't it right for us who are successful in the West to build up these states that I mentioned earlier and others so that the extremists don't take hold?
As a senior American diplomat said, Robert Gallucci, several years ago, he said, everyone's forecasting the end of the state, but why is everyone trying to get one? I mean, it's the only unit that's out there. You, sir, and then we'll wrap up.
Thank you, Chairman. My name is David Price. I'm a journalist and writer. I've written a number of books about Robert Schuman and the origin, purpose and future of the European community. I would like to raise a subject which is very important but is often avoided. I was happy to see that Mr. Bashir mentioned it earlier, which is the relationship between Islam and the Judeo-Christian tradition and foundation, the origins. We're talking about origins. Schuman, who initiated the European community, and we now have the longest period of peace in 2,000 years of European history, based the community idea on Judeo-Christian values, specifically the Bible, and I think American has some similar project which is based on those values as well. Mr. Bashir mentioned that the Quranic tradition says that the Islamic believers should study the Torah and the Bible, and I say this is a subject people don't like to talk about, but we have basically failed in the West to maintain a level of understanding of biblical studies. And I think that it would be very useful if the West did something about it, but also the Islamic countries also have a duty in the Quranic commandments to study the Bible and the Torah, and yet the Bible is not very well circulated in Arabic or studied as such, and neither is it in the West. I'd like to raise that question to the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Price. Really a very good point, and I'm remembering the previous papal interest in seeing if the Saudis would begin to make some space for Christian worship. You know, what sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, that approach which has gone absolutely nowhere. I invite you, Yusuf, if you like, Mark, you, Dr. Bodansky, perhaps after they've responded to the questions that are out there, and then we really should wrap up.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to respond to Amjad Bashir's comment about the failed state and our responsibilities. I think one of the real issues has been we don't learn our lessons. One would have thought after Somalia would have learned that when moved into Iraq and Afghanistan that the importance of having not just a strong military hand, but having a plan which we would follow through on to rebuild the societies that we're destroying would not have been in place. And certainly in Libya, be the most blatant example, where we removed a 42-year-long dictatorship by Muammar al-Gaddafi, which was a dreadful government by every sense of imagination. But then we just left. We packed up and we left. And the vacuum which was created, the militias which had access to enormous amounts of funds, and from still oil industry was still going on, but also the enormous arsenal of weapons which Gaddafi had, which then spread throughout Africa and have caused all sorts of havoc as a result. Putting that Humpty Dumpty back together again is going to be difficult. It can be done, I think, because it's a very homogeneous population of only 5 million people, but it's going to be difficult. We need to have more of an intensified effort to try to do that. Yemen's another question. Yemen was a country which Yemenis are very intelligent people. It's a wonderful country, and yet the Saudis decided they had radical Houthis down there who had to be removed because they were believed to be Iranian stooges. That's not the case. They, of course, the Houthi movement was formed because of a reaction to the creation of Wahhabi proselytization in the north, which was undermining traditional Zaidi values. The Houthis are basically, Zaydis are the Sunnis of the Zaydis, and the Zaydis of the Houthis. They're of Zaydis of the Sunnis. It's a very moderate group of Shiite Islam. But I think what's happening there is with the UN focused elsewhere, this very unbiased resolution which is put in largely puts the Houthis in a box in order to try and save Yemen from becoming a failed state, but to find a way in which we can open up that box and find ways in which we can engage the Yemeni parties amongst themselves, resolve their issues, which I think can be done if we get to it soon. Thank you.
And by the way, traditions going way back to the Christian monastic tradition in Yemen, in the hills, of actually interacting scripturally with the Christians. So much has been lost.
Okay. Thank you very much. Very short comment to the question of Rabbi Herschel Klug. How to deal of extremism? I think forced migration is a sound source of extremism, or to raise the extremism. For example, by reason of unemployment or by reason of wars, it doesn't matter. In Turkey, as example from my country, all of the radical groups are not financed by the German government, but by the Turkish workers working in Germany, because they feel somehow discriminated. There are two ways of surviving. Either survival survival of compatibles or survival of the fittest. If the case is, if the people somehow feel survival of the fittest is the case, in this case, they are beginning to be radicalized. They are beginning to finance the radical movements, and then you raise enough funds from those poor people, not from the rich people. And therefore, we should be very careful to control the migration. If we cannot control the migration by forced migration, I'm speaking from the forced migration, it is very difficult to control the extremism. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So I just, in a context like this, I hesitate to show you this, but I was just shown this sign suggesting that it was time for us to end our occasion and go to lunch. So, Josip Bodansky.
Okay. 2 seconds. I'll try in 2 minutes to answer Mr. Bashir. Middle East, it's encapsulated bullets. Middle East, for the last 5 years in Iraq, for the last 15 years, the tribes, the extended families saved the people from everything. They will not abandon that safety net for revived, renewed state authority. State has been against them, the tribe saved them, they will not take the risk. If you look throughout the rest of the developing world, it was tribe, nationalities, sub-state entities that saved people not only from wars, but also from hunger and plagues and so on and so forth, where the state failed them. They are not going to go back to the state, no matter how much we like statehood. If you look at Central Asia, Uzbeks constitute 40%, or only 40% of the Uzbeks live in Uzbekistan, the state of the Uzbeks. The rest are competing nationalities. You have all over Africa tribal movements that cross state borders, from Tuaregs to Fulanis to what have you. You cannot take it, you cannot erase it, you cannot say, oh, we want state, we want this box, please identify with it, please develop new national sentiments or whatever it is. It won't work. The state failed. 5 billion people have been failed by the state. We cannot turn the clock back, unfortunately.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for lunch, and I want to say in closing that occasions like this, conferences like this, are invariably rather downbeat, right? But Professor Talwar, very stimulating and inspiring comments, and there really is a chance. And I was saying to him, you know, there's a paucity of choice, not just in central London for those type of young people, but elsewhere. I'd argue, northern Alabama, there are similar things in play, and we're dealing with some very interesting nativist reaction in the U.S. as well. So I feel inspired by your talk, and I hope that people support you.
Thank you very much.
Right. Anyway, everyone, thank you very much for a very pleasant occasion, and we hope to be back, don't we, Rebal, again?